I didn't remember anything before the white room. Just the sterile smell of bleach and the gentle hum of a fan. I awoke on ice-cold floor tiles, face down in a puddle of my own drool. I remembered my name instantly. I was Mary. I was 38 years old. But that was it. I had no idea who I was or where I had come from. The room was stark white and clinical, with 4 TV screens in front of me. The screens were old, the kind from my childhood, with a built-in VCR, chunky and box-like. When I woke up, they were on standby, static prickling across the glass. I demanded where I was, my mouth filled with rotten-tasting egg. Silence. The buzzing lights above flickered off, leaving me in the dark, disoriented and, I guess, forced to look at the 4 screens. Below them sat a small glass table with a steaming cup of coffee and a single cookie. For a while, I was too scared to move. I sat on my knees trying to remember anything about my life. But like broken puzzle pieces, I had come apart, unraveling, left only with my name and age. Was I suffering from memory loss? I checked myself over, testing for a head injury. I knew exactly how to perform health checks, almost obsessively checking for concussions. That told me something. I was in the medical field perhaps, but this felt personal somehow. Too personal. This felt, oh God, like I had done this before. And just like those times, revulsion crept up my throat, panic twisting in my gut. But I didn't know why. I didn't know why I felt sick to my stomach, why my cheeks burned and why my hands trembled. I was used to checking for bumps and scrapes. I knew exactly where to prod my scalp, running my fingers down my skull. But I was fine. I tried to escape. There were 2 cameras on the ceiling, which meant that I was being observed, and my instinct screamed at me to get the heck out. At that point, I didn't care how. I tried the door. Locked. I screamed to be let out. Again, silence. Heavy, suffocating silence that was too loud. That captured my every breath, making me too aware of my frenzied gasps. I noticed a pile of tapes sitting on the VCR player. I crawled forward and grabbed the first one at the top of the pile. February 2024 was scrawled in block capitals across the label. I felt like I was in a trance, like something was compelling me. The tape felt right in my clammy hands, as if I had held it before. I slid it into the machine and pressed play. The screens flickered on. A room full of kids. Teenagers. They looked like college students or high school seniors, 17 or 18 years old. The room was identical to mine but smaller. The same 4 white walls. But unlike my room, theirs was empty. No TV screens and no coffee or food. Just blank white walls staring back at them, and a single bucket for a toilet. I had no idea how long they had been inside. But when one of them, a blonde girl with a high ponytail, jumped up and began throwing herself at the walls, panic clawed up my throat. This was the start. The girl started screaming. Almost immediately, another girl, a brunette with tight curls, stood up, strode over to her and slapped her across the face. I tensed, waiting for a fight to break out. But instead of hitting back, the blonde wrapped her arms around the brunette, sobbing into her shoulder. A moment later, they both returned to the others, sitting cross-legged on the floor. I counted 10 of them, 5 girls, 5 boys. They wore identical white shorts and t-shirts, blending into the walls and floor. They looked disoriented, just like me. They sat in a circle, wide-eyed, staring at each other like they were strangers. No. I moved closer, glued to the screen, and I watched them back away from each other. One boy shuffled back, jumped up, and tried to run, smacking straight into the wall. They were strangers. I wasn't even sure that they knew their own names. My heart felt like it was lodged in my throat. Were they nearby? Were they in the next room over? If they were in the room next to mine, then we could help out each other. Already I was slamming my fists against the door, then the walls, screaming for help. "Hello?" I shrieked, before my cry died in my throat, and I almost laughed. I wasn't watching a live tape. The realization slowly has settled in, like cruel pinpricks sliding into me. I turned back to the screens, stumbling over and grabbing the second tape. March 2024. Something thick and slimy filled my mouth. I placed the tape back on the pile, forcing myself to stay calm. I was an adult, and these kids, wherever they were currently, needed my help. Well, that's what I kept telling myself. But every so often, my gaze would find the screens once again, and I felt myself unraveling. The footage was recorded last year, and the pile of tapes were clearly documenting their captivity. Sure, they could have been rescued, I told myself. But if these kids were safe, I wouldn't have been kidnapped. I was already putting the pieces together. Whoever took me wanted me to watch these teenagers inside this white room with no door, no escape, no food. Instinctively, I drank the coffee and I ate the cookie. Whoever these people were, they weren't interested in hurting me. They wanted to hurt these teenagers. The coffee was lukewarm and the cookie tasted familiar as somehow oven-baked and fresh. There was icing, but it had been scraped off. Something told me that I wouldn't be in the room for long, not long enough to get hungry or thirsty. I found myself scanning the ceiling for more cameras. There was one attached to every corner, most likely recording every angle of my face. My stomach twisted as I studied the monitors. Like mine, they displayed different angles of the room trapping the teens. Screen 1 zoomed in on the girls. 4 of them had gathered together already, with one stray boy joining them. Screens 2 and 3 focused on the boys, appearing to be already arguing. Screen 4 was a bird's-eye view of all of them. "All right, everyone listen up." One of the boys stood. He looked to be the leader type, tall and athletic-looking, thick brown hair and freckles. The kids didn't have names, so I renamed him Boy Number 1 in my head. Boy Number 1's voice was shaking, but he kept his expression stoic. I noticed that he kept scratching at his arms, a nervous tick. "So, I'm pretty sure somebody's playing some messed up game." His head tipped back, eyes glued to the camera. Screen 3 zoomed right into his face, his twitching bottom lip. He was trying not to cry. "But we need to keep a clear head, okay? Does anybody remember anything about themselves?" He pointed to himself. "I don't know my name. I just know that I'm 18 and I just graduated high school." Boy 1 took a leadership role. He was reluctant, but the other kids seemed to gravitate towards him. They went around the room and it became clear to me that these kids had their memories screwed with too. The blonde, I named her Girl Number 1, who had freaked out earlier in the tape, was immediately intriguing. She didn't know her name, but she did tearfully exclaim, I have a mom and I know she's looking for me, which triggered paranoia among the group. The brunette, girl number 2 who had slapped her, brought up the possibility of girl number 1 being in on their imprisonment. Well, that's ridiculous, boy number 1 snapped. He stood up, assuming his role of leader. This room had no concept of time or night and day. They could have been arguing for hours and they wouldn't even know it. Why would she willingly join in on whatever this is? Well, this is clearly some kind of test, girl number 2 said matter-of-factly. What if she's, I don't know, the daughter of one of the researchers, or even a researcher herself? I told you I'm not in on this. I don't know anything about this, girl number 1 shrieked, pulling her legs to her chest. She seemed genuinely afraid, burying her head in her knees. Please, I just want to go home, she screamed and the others jumped. I want to go home. I want my mom. And girl number 2 started to speak, only for boy number 1 to shoot her the mother of all death glares. Don't. He shuffled over to her. The last thing we need is to lose trust in each other. And girl number 2 averted her gaze, sliding away from him. Get the heck away from me. Boy number 1 looked hurt. I could tell that he was the weakest among the group. He made the mistake of acting like a leader, but he was doing just that. Acting. In reality, he was just a scared teenager. His bottom lip wobbled, but he shook his head, forcing a wide and gritted smile. Aye, aye, Captain. Freckles thinks we're getting out of here with the power of friendship. Another kid, a guy with thick blonde hair and glasses, was curled into himself. I was sure that he was crying, but no matter how many times the cameras tried to catch his face, he avoided it. I called him boy number 2. Oh, that's adorable. I'll make sure to rely on friendship when we're starving. To my surprise, boy number 1 crawled over to the guy laying down beside him. Go away. Boy number 2 grumbled into his arms. I'm trying to manifest my way home. Boy number 1 snorted. It was the first time that I had seen him smile. And you call me delusional. The March 24 tape outlined what looked like the first month of their imprisonment. I watched it every second, every camera angle. The kids got used to their captivity, distracting themselves with games of charades and sleeping lions. They each gave up a clothing item so that they could create a makeshift curtain for the toilet. They were given new clothes, but it was weekly instead of daily. Glued to the tape, I barely noticed someone had replaced my coffee with a new one. This time I was given a cupcake, again with the icing scraped off. Ignoring my own circumstances, I watched the kids slowly start to unravel. Food was given to them every morning at exactly 7 a.m., and it was good food. I watched them receive trays of McDonald's breakfast, and for the first few days and then weeks, they seemed okay. The kids started to form a plan to escape, orchestrated by boy number 1. Their plan was to wait until their food was delivered and then attack in numbers. However, when their breakfast was delivered, it was a single slice of bread. I already knew what game their kidnappers were playing. After 3 days of no breakfast, boy number 1 caught on. They're punishing us. He spoke up while they were sharing half a slice of bread. The portion sizes were getting smaller and smaller. Boy number 1 was rationing his own, tearing pieces off and eating them in intervals. He was also hiding yesterday's water down his pants. The kid was smart. We formulated a plan to escape, and the people watching us don't want that, he said. Boy number 1's lips formed a small smile. He was planning something. So for now, we play their game, He was right. The kids stayed mostly silent all day, and they were rewarded with 3 cooked meals. Following boy number 1's words, the teens stayed quiet. Boy number 2 suggested that they name themselves. Boy number 1 wanted to be named Clam because it felt right. Boy number 2 insisted on Ryder. Boy number 3, who I was pretty sure was narcoleptic, curled up in one corner, was named Z, like he was sleeping. Boy number 4, a hard-faced redhead who started most arguments over food, refused to be renamed, so the others called him Shitface. Finally, boy number 5, a kid with a buzz cut, just shrugged and called himself Buzz. And girl number 1, the blonde who would calm down, didn't want to be a part of the naming ceremony. But halfway through, she squeaked, "Sabrina, I like the name Sabrina." And girl number 2, the fiery brunette, immediately called her out. "Okay, but why Sabrina?" she demanded, her eyes narrowed, hands planted on hips. "So that's your real name?" She was ignored, and after realizing that her theories weren't helping, girl number 2 sighed and reluctantly named herself Scooby. And girl number 3, a quiet kid with pigtails, shrugged. "I like Ruby." Girl number 4, the frizzy redhead with glasses, didn't speak, so the others gave her a name, Mittens. Girl number 5, who had come up with the naming ceremony, smiled wildly. She pinned her dark curls into a knotted bun. I had never seen an 18-year-old wear butterfly hair slides. "Brianna." The tape ended on her wide, smiling face, the screen flickering off. I didn't have any concept of time in that room, but I had a feeling that the tape had lasted around 2 hours. 2 hours per tape and 3 coffee refills that I never saw. While I had been watching, another 2 cupcakes were balanced on a plate. I checked them. The icing had once again been scraped off. For a moment, I was paralyzed, coffee bile sliding back up my throat. "Who are you?" I asked the people watching me. When I was met with no response, I kept my voice calm. "What are you doing to these children?" I had so many questions. Why was I being made to watch these tapes? Why VCR in 2025? Were these kids alive or dead, and did I even want to know? When my cry bounced back at me, reverberating around the room, I felt myself snap. I screamed, but it felt like screaming into a vacuum. My own cry sounding wrong, foreign, and not even mine. I was trembling, my chest aching, my throat on fire. I didn't want to watch it, I couldn't. But already I was crawling over to the pile of tapes and choosing April 24. Whatever happened to these kids, I couldn't stop it. But every time that tape slipped from my fingers, I dropped to my knees and grabbed it, running my fingers over the surface. It felt personal and wrong, and yet right in my hands. The scratchy label and the smooth plastic of the tape. I rolled it around between my hands, my gaze glued to each screen. I wish that I never watched them. I wish I never knew their names. But I had to know what happened to them. I had to know what 12 months of captivity did to these kids. Feeling sick to my stomach, I slid in April 24. The screen flashed blue before flickering to life on a still shot of boy number 1, Clam, with his ear pressed to the door. The others were gathered around, sitting in a semicircle. I had missed several days. The kids looked worn out and tired, their clothes filthy and torn up. There was a giant, crayoned rainbow on the far wall. Mittens, girl number 4, was playing with a green crayon, sticking it in her mouth like a cigarette. I guess they were given them. "It's here." Clem stumbled back, and my gaze found him once again, his eyes wide. His cry caused a commotion among the others, and realization slammed into me. They were starving again. Clem's eyes were hollow, his cheeks sunken and significantly pale. There was a certain twitch in his lips that I was trying to ignore. He had torn off the bottoms of his pants, wrapping them around his head. I had no idea how long they had been without food, but the way they moved, almost feral, backing away from the door like startled deer, gave me an idea. It looked like days. "Everyone get back!" He snarled, and to my surprise, the others slowly retracted. Clem really was a leader, glaring down the others until they stepped back. Scooby, girl number 2, squeaked in delight when the food was delivered through a slot in the door. 6 bags of steaming Five Guys. But the delivery wasn't finished. When they were all tearing into their meals, something else was slid through. I barely even noticed it myself. I was too busy watching Clem eating like an animal, stuffing fries down his throat. He was going to choke. I felt uncomfortable, my hands shaking, like I could reach through the screen and snatch his burger off him. The boy was ravenous. I didn't understand why I felt physical pain in my chest. I had only known these kids for a few hours and already I was attached to them. I snapped out of it when the second delivery hit the ground, startling the kids. It hit the sterile white floor tiles with a bang. A pickaxe. I felt the phantom legs of a spider entwine around my spine. Clem dropped his burger and stood slowly. "Don't go near it," girl number 1, Sabrina, shrieked. Clem didn't listen to her, and something twisted in my gut. He picked it up, the thing weighty in his hands, and then he hurled it at the wall. "Screw you," Clem spat, his gaze flicking to camera 3. I felt a visceral reaction running through me, shuffling back on my knees, and then unexpectedly he broke into a manic grin. "We're not that crazy yet." With a mocking bow, he returned to his meal, and the others fell in stride with them. Nobody mentioned the pickaxe, and each kid seemed relatively adjusted. They played games, drawing on the walls, resorting back to children. I noticed Shitface, boy number 4, inching towards the axe, but he just laughed when Clem backed him into a corner. He shoved him back, maintaining a wide grin. "Oh, relax, Freckles, I'm joking around." The girls, however, who had formed a tight-knit group, kept their distance. When the next day came around, I think they were expecting no breakfast, and they were right. "It's okay," Clem reassured them. "We ate yesterday, we should be okay for a while." Sabrina nodded, perched in Scooby's lap. "Yeah, he's right, and they'll feed us eventually." They were wrong. 3 days passed with no food and limited water. I think they were drinking from the toilet, and fights were starting to break out. Clem was sharing what he had managed to scavenge, but I could see it in their faces. They were starting to lose their balance, growing delirious. Sometimes their wandering gazes found the pickaxe still lying on the floor. They looked away quickly, but it was clear these kids were starting to get desperate. The lights flickered off, plunging them into darkness. I could still see them through what looked like night vision, but the kids were blind. They gathered together in one corner led by Clem. "It's okay," he kept telling them, his voice shuddering. "We can get through this." Another day without food or light, the majority of them too hungry to move, and boy number 4 finally snapped. "They're not going to feed us," he announced, slowly getting to his feet, swaying off balance. He stumbled and alarm bells started ringing in my head. "Unless we use it." Clem stood, but boy number 2, Ryder, the sandy-haired kid, yanked him back down. "He's doing it on purpose, bro," Ryder muttered, his eyes half-lidded. He was the peacemaker. "The dude just wants attention." To my surprise, boy number 3 and boy number 5 also got to their feet. Boy number 4 crawled over to the axe, blindly grabbing for it. "We're all hungry," he announced, smacking the blade into his hand. His eyes were crazed, almost feral, lips pulled back in a bloodthirsty grin. Shitface held up the axe. "So I propose, instead of sitting around and singing Kumbaya waiting to starve to death, we choose someone for the chop." The others screamed, immediately on their feet. The way they responded reminded me of animals in a pack. They couldn't see, but I think they could sense each other, and that was enough. With a sharp jerk of his head, Clem motioned the others behind him. Clem, Ryder, and Sabrina started forwards uncertain, in the pitch dark. But this was already a mistake, and they knew that. Scooby and Mittens dragged them back with help from Brianna. Shitface swung the axe playfully. "I'm just saying, we got actual food when we did what they wanted." He started toward the others in slow, teasing strides. "I nominate Freckles. He is our leader after all, and what leader wouldn't sacrifice himself?" The boy's lips curled into a smirk. "For the greater good, dude." The light suddenly flickered on, surprising the group. Clem's side backed away, blinking rapidly, some of them hissing, while boy number 4 stayed nonchalant, swinging the axe. They saw it as a mercy, some of the girls breaking down in relief, far off in the corner. But I saw Shitface's smile grow, his eyes widening. He saw it like invisible gods were confirming his belief. "They gave us light back," he yelled, and through that stone-cold demeanor and wild eyes, I glimpsed a scared teenage boy. He was terrified, and so he was acting out. "They want something back after what they've given us," he announced, slipping effortlessly into the leadership role. "They fed us, now they want payment." He was playing with their heads to get them to agree. He was smart, smarter than he let on. And he was hungry, I understood that. And he was scared, but resorting to murder. The boy was in front of Clem in 3 strides. Boy number 3 and number 5 following. His smile was spiteful. He had been itching to take the lead. I could tell by the way that he moved, that cocky saunter in his step. "You want us all to be okay, right?" he murmured, inclining his head mockingly. "You want everything to be sunshine and rainbows. So why not take one for the team, oh fearless leader?" He dropped to his knees, dramatizing a cry. "Please, oh leader, must you let us suffer? We are your followers after all." Clem didn't move. Sabrina stood behind him, pressing her face into his shoulder. "Ignore him," she murmured. "Just get back." Clem gently shook her away with a defeated sigh. "Okay, fine, you're right. And give me the axe." Boy number 4's expression crumpled with confusion. He lurched back, but Clem snatched the axe, twisted around, and hacked off Sabrina's head with a single, brutal chop to the back of her neck. I think I tried to stop the tape, but I was frozen, watching pooling scarlet seeping across white tiles. The others erupted into screams, and Sabrina's body landed at Clem's feet. He didn't move, his fingers tightening around the wooden handle, beads of red dripping down his face and splattering his white t-shirt. Shitface staggered back, his eyes wide and mouth open. Clem, unsteady on his feet, pivoted to face the others cowering in the corner. He was eerily calm, his gaze unblinking. I think I had just watched this boy lose his humanity. His eyes were vacant, empty pools, a flicker of a triumphant smile twitching on his lips. The hollowness of his expression stood out, terrifying and void, and I wondered if I was seeing everything. The tapes had been strategically recorded. I had no doubt there was missing footage. If they don't feed us, then we'll feed them. I felt like I was going to puke. Boy number 1, Clem. I found myself moving closer to the screen until I could feel static prickling my face. He was still a kid. I didn't understand why I was crying. I couldn't stop. My hands were trembling, my heart pounding through my chest. He was 18, just graduated. I fell back when he swung the axe one more time. His gaze locked onto the camera before placing it back on the floor. Ignoring Sabrina's body, Clem turned his attention to Shitface. "Don't mess with me," he murmured, before he dragged himself to a corner, dropped to his knees, and curled into a ball. Scooby did her best to cover Sabrina's body. Mittens helped her. And Brianna sat in a corner, head buried in her knees. And breakfast came the next morning. 9 individual trays filled with croissants, cupcakes, toast, cereal, and chocolate. The others stuffed their faces, but I wasn't watching them. I was watching Clem, who instead of joining them for breakfast, was crawling towards Sabrina's body at a snail's pace. When he reached her, I expected him to say a prayer or hug her, but instead, Clem soaked his hands in her blood and shuffled over to the wall. He used her blood like paint, while the wall was his canvas, head inclined, lazily dragging his fingers, scrawling a simple smiley face. The other kids' expressions were clear on each screen. They were terrified of him. Mittens and Brianna were silently eating while Scooby and Shitface stayed away, hiding in individual corners of the room. Ryder was the only one trying to make conversation, picking at his chocolate croissant. But even his gaze was frantic, flicking back and forth between Clem and the blood-stained axe abandoned in the corner. When a loaded gun was dropped through the delivery slot in the door this time, all eyes turned to Clem, still hovering over Sabrina's body. It looked like he was trying to push her brains back inside her skull. Mittens surprised me by shuffling over to the gun and sticking it down her shirt. She nodded to the others, and to my confusion, they seemed to go along with it. Ryder dropped a plate of food in front of Clem. "Eat, dude." He pulled a face. "What are you doing?" "Didn't we get another weapon this morning?" Clem asked, sitting up with a sigh. Something acidic filled my mouth. He was smearing her blood all over his face. Ryder didn't reply, and the teenager turned to the others. "I said, did we get another weapon?" "Nope." Shitface spoke up from his corner. "No need for frontal lobotomies today, oh fearless leader." Clem slowly inclined his head and the lights flickered off once again. These kidnappers were clever. They were using the lights as a form of communication. "No." I was already choking on my words when Mittens dropped the gun with a squeak. Before I knew what I was doing, I slammed my fists into the wall. "Stop!" I shrieked, my mouth full of bile. "What was that?" Clem's voice sent my heart into my throat. On screen, his gaze was on the camera, directly at me. There was no way that he could hear me. This was pre-recorded footage from a year ago. And yet, what was what? Ryder murmured with a nervous laugh. "Can you hear something?" I threw myself into the wall, screaming. They could hear me, but that was impossible. "That!" Clem staggered to the wall, pressing his ear against its sterile white. His eyes narrowed, his lip curling. "It's a woman." With the group's attention on the cameras, I grabbed the coffee cup, hurling it against the wall. "Hello?" I yelled. "It's okay, I'm gonna get you out of there." The tape stopped with 9 pairs of eyes trained on camera 4. I felt myself hit the ground, my head spinning. There was no way that they could hear me. No way. I slid back over to the tapes, kneeling in freezing cold coffee. Feeling suffocated, I shoved the May 24 tape into the player. Blank. The screen was white. It was playing, but there was no footage. Panic started to slither down my spine, contorting in my gut. I ejected the tape and slid in June 24. Blank. The screen this time was bright blue, reflecting in my face. By now, I was scrambling and grabbing July 24. They were all blank of footage, empty. I went through August and September. I think at this point it was starting to hit me. Was April 24 alive? I left the screens, this time pounding on the door. "Hello," I cried, punching the wall until my fists were bleeding. "Can anyone hear me?" When my lights went out, the screens flashed from bright blue to a single still image. Clem. His face was projected on all 4 screens, his wide, grinning mouth, his hollow eyes. Behind him, the walls had been smeared scarlet, entrails dripping from the ceiling. I could see bodies behind him, but I couldn't make them out. He inclined his head slowly, a mockery of a bow, as blood seeped down his chin, stringy, red tangled in his hair. And atop his head sat a crown of something, stark and jagged and glittering in the dim white light. I tried 6 months worth of tapes all the way to March 25, but every single one of them was just Clem grinning at the camera. Sometimes he would paw at it like an animal, fleshy red clinging to his teeth. And December 24 was more lively. He skipped around the room, slipping in blood, giggling for almost 6 hours straight before going back to the camera, back to me. When I had ejected the last tape, the door clicked open. I reached for the tapes, but a voice startled me. "Leave them, Mary." I did, slowly walking out of the room. I was on a long white corridor and drinking in each door. Those kids could have been behind one of them. Before I could check them out, a fire door was opened, and I was ushered outside where a car was waiting. I got inside with no question, and the car drove me home. Home. I suddenly recognized my hometown, the high school, the kindergarten, the soccer field. When the car stopped at the end of my road, I almost toppled out, my memories slamming into me like waves of ice water. I ran home to my husband, who was standing on the doorstep, his lips pursed. He was pale, his hands full of paper. "Harry." He hugged me, wrapping his arms around me. "You didn't find him," he whispered into my shoulder. I pulled away, my throat on fire. "Him?" I jumped when a golden retriever jumped up at me. "Clem." I ruffled his head, tears stinging my eyes. He was such a good boy. Harry led me back inside our house into our kitchen filled with cookies and cupcakes with "Have you seen this boy?" perfectly written with blue icing, and littering our house posters with a familiar face. I snatched one up and immediately puked. Zach. The smiling boy on the cupcakes and cookies, on the missing posters. I knew how to look for bumps and scrapes because I was used to them. I was used to checking for concussions when my baby was knocked over on the football field. I wasn't in the medical field, I wasn't a doctor. I was a mom. I didn't know that I was screaming until Harry wrapped me into a hug. "Honey, what's wrong?" He kept saying, but I was numb. I climbed the stairs with shaky legs and stumbled into my son's room, Zach. Memories swamped me. dragging me to all fours. I remembered his 10th birthday party, his mouth full of frosting. "Look, Mommy." His voice is in my head. I can still see his face. Zach, my sweet boy. How did I forget him? How did they make me forget him? Boy number 1, Clem, the emotionless killer who had murdered a room full of teenagers. My son. Please help me. I need help. I found my son, but I lost him again. I don't even know if he's there anymore. I can't breathe. I know it sounds crazy, but on the April tape, those kids could hear me. My son could hear me. But how is that possible? My baby is out there. Whatever state he's in, I need to find him. Most of my childhood was spent in the same 20 square miles of forest, somewhere in the Appalachian wilderness. I lived there with my mom in this cabin she claims to have built with her own 2 hands. I believed her for a while though now. I'm fairly certain she just found an abandoned cabin and fixed it up as best she could. It was so cold in the winter, and the small fires that we managed to produce in the fireplace did little to warm the area. Most winter nights were spent with us cuddled under the same blanket. During the summers, the cabin was so humid that you could see the wood sweating. Often, we would opt for sleeping outside on summer nights, despite the clouds of mosquitoes that the makeshift netting my mom made from old fabric did little to quell. The multitude of bug bites was preferable to waking up dehydrated from sweat though. Our days back then were mostly spent with my mom hunting for small animals to cook and eat, while I gathered firewood and picked berries. On rare occasions, we would take breaks and spend the day singing songs or reading from the handful of books that she had. However, we needed to survive, and that meant working hard to ensure that we had food and fresh water. My mask made foraging more difficult than it should have been. I constantly had to pull at the white cotton sheet to fit the eye holes over my eyes, and it would often become drenched in sweat within an hour. The only time that I ever took off my mask was when my mom bathed me. I would often try to catch my reflection in the water, but it was never clean enough. I wondered if she had ever seen my face. She would have had to seen it the day that I was born, right? I learned early on not to ask my mom questions that involved the masks or my face. The only answer I ever received was that if I took off my mask in front of someone, something bad would happen. If I pushed any further, she would say, "I'm your mother and you should trust that I know what's best." And I did for a long time. My mother was my whole world, and I loved her as much as a boy could. We spent most of our time together, and I have mostly happy memories of her. Of course, there are bad memories sprinkled in there, with some being downright horrible. I recall once when I was somewhere between 4 and 6, I was playing outside in our garden. Mom was on the other side of the yard doing laundry while I hopped through the soft dirt, stepping on any pests that I saw. Looking at their guts on the underside of my shoes every time that I stepped on one filled me with a sense of satisfaction, knowing that I was aiding in our survival in a small way. I had made my way to the end of the garden when I noticed the rabbit cage. Mom had kept several that she had caught in traps to breed for meat. She told me to not get attached to any of them as we would be eating them all at some point. But of course, I had given them all names and loved sticking my fingers in the cage to feel their soft fur. One of the females, whom I had named Daisy after a character in one of my mom's books, was staring at me, and she chewed on whatever vegetation she had in her mouth as I approached. She didn't scurry or hide like all the others in the cage. instead continuing to look me in the eyes. The curious way she watched me made me smile underneath my mask. We looked at each other for a while before I got the sudden urge to untie the twine from my neck. It fell to the ground and I slowly pulled the mask away from my face. Daisy continued staring as I moved my bare face closer to hers. A warmth fell over me as she stared. The feeling of having someone, even a small-minded creature like a rabbit, see my real face was almost euphoric. The rabbit didn't cower as I thought it might upon seeing my face. The way my mom pushed to keep my face hidden made me think that there was something horrible about it. But if there was, Daisy didn't care. She didn't look at me any differently than she might my mom or one of the other rabbits. It made me smile brighter than I ever had. "Nestor," called my mom from around the corner. I struggled to grab my mask from the ground and throw it back in my face, but it was too late. Mom grabbed me by the shoulder while staring at the sky and smacked the back of my head hard enough to make my vision blur. "Put your mask back on right now," she cried. I did as she asked, and she pulled me away from the scene, leaving Daisy still staring in the spot where I had been standing. We had Daisy for dinner that night. Mom didn't have to tell me as I had seen her take Daisy from the cage from my bedroom window. I listened to her frantic squeaks before Mom likely broke her neck, as was her common method for killing our dinner. Daisy lay in a charred pile in the center of the table that night. Mom pulled off one of her legs and threw it on my plate. "Eat," she said. Tears soaked the inside of my mask as I pulled down the mouth hole a bit, so it sat as close to my mouth as I could get it. I picked up Daisy's leg and I brought it to my lips. "Eat," she yelled. I took a bite of the unseasoned meat and tore it away from the bone. I closed my eyes while chewing and swallowed. Mom nodded and began eating some breast meat, satisfied. "Do you realize what could have happened if I accidentally saw you without your mask?" she asked. "No, you won't tell me," I returned defiantly. Mom paused as if trying to gather her thoughts. She sighed and then gave her constant answer of, "Something bad." I felt my mask poking at the small holes that had begun to form along the neck. I would have a new one the first time I met another person. Like the last mask, this one was made from cloth, but it was a bit thicker, as if it were made from a thick jacket. Despite this, it breathed better, making the summer trips collecting berries a bit more bearable. I was 8 or 9 years old during one of these trips, and several yards from us, I spotted a bush covered in red berries. We avoided the green berries, and most of what we ate was dark purple and bitter. However, the red ones had a sweet, tangy flavor that I still crave sometimes. I rushed over to them, carrying my basket in tow. I hadn't gotten used to my long legs and arms from my growth spurt earlier that year, so I awkwardly flopped around before reaching the bush. As I approached, it moved a little, like something was inside. I moved closer, assuming that it was a squirrel or some other small critter that I could easily fight off. A mop of blonde hair poked out from the side of the bush. I rounded it to see the back of a kid. They turned as soon as I had approached, and I was met with a blue-eyed, skinny blonde girl. She was around my age. Her hair fell past her shoulders, and it was full of leaves. The dirt stains on her clothes and scratches across her bare legs told me that she had been in the woods for a while. "Hi," the girl said with a bright smile. I backed away a bit. "Why are you wearing a mask? Are you a superhero?" she asked with a mocking laugh. "Superhero?" I asked. "Yeah," she returned before reaching into her back pocket and pulling out a rolled comic book. She handed it to me and I saw Spider-Man written on the front. It was the first time that I had ever seen anyone else in a mask, though his was a lot cooler than mine. "You should wear one like him instead," the girl said. The sound of leaves crunching sounded behind me, and I saw my mom approach with her bow and arrow. Her eyes widened when she noticed the girl. "Hello," the girl said. I watched my mom's hands shake as she held the bow and arrow tightly against her side. Another sound came from behind the girl, and Mom quickly lifted the weapon. It was a man with a large brown beard. He spotted my mom and instantly threw his hands up in submission while slowly moving in front of the girl. "Who are you?" Mom asked. Hello," he said. "I'm Monty and this is my daughter Jamie. We're camping nearby. Sorry, I didn't know that we were on someone's property." Mom refused to lower the bow and arrow. "You need to leave." "Is this your property?" the man asked. Mom bit her lip and her arm started to shake. "Yes," she said. "Would the parks office confirm that if I called?" he asked. Mom lowered the bow a little. "Jamie, why don't you go find some firewood?" he said. "But Dad..." "Go." Jamie pursed her lips and glanced at me before stomping away. "Look, if you're this deep in the woods, I assume you're hiding from something just like we are," he said to my mom before looking at me and raising his eyebrow. "We don't want any trouble, and I don't care what you're doing out here, honestly." "You see that tree?" Mom said, pointing to the tallest one in the area. "Don't cross it again. You or your girl." "You got it," Monty said with a smile, and with that, my mom lowered her weapon. "I was just bluffing, by the way. I ain't got a phone. It's too easy to track." Mom grabbed me by the arm and pulled as we started walking back home. "If you ever want to trade some of your kills, let me know," he said. "We've got plenty of beans and rice." Mom ignored him. "We're in the RV down the trail about 2 miles, he called. I looked back and saw the girl waving. I didn't stop looking until they disappeared in the distance. I hoped Mom got the rabbit that she had caught for dinner, holding the bag for the innards as she ripped them out of the small creature. She hadn't said much since we met the father and daughter in the woods, and I couldn't tell if she was concerned or mad. I knew I should avoid bringing it up, but I couldn't help myself. "I thought you said there was no one else in these woods," I said as she placed a handful of viscera into the bag. "Oh, there weren't," she said, "and I need to figure out a way to get rid of them." "Why?" I asked. "They didn't seem dangerous." She paused. "Everyone is dangerous, Nestor." I dropped my head and stared into the bag for a while, not meaning to. My eyes got lost in the red and pink mixture that slid with every slight movement. The image of the girl popped into my head and wouldn't seem to leave. "You're thinking about her, aren't you?" Mom asked. Over time, I've learned many moms have this ability to predict exactly what their child is thinking, or at least offer a good guess. She was around your age. I looked at my mom and then back into the bag. She dropped the rabbit onto the wood slab and knelt in front of me. "I know you're lonely, but you know that it has to be this way," she said. "But why?" I asked. "You never tell me." "I tell you that you need to trust me," she said before standing back up. "And that should be the only explanation you need." It wasn't, though. I don't know if it was the fact that my mind was changing in adolescence or that I had finally had enough, but I had already started thinking of ways that I could sneak away and meet that girl again. "Oh, I know it'll make you feel better," Mom said before taking off her blood-stained gloves and going inside. She came back out a few minutes later, holding something behind her back. She stopped in front of me and my hand started to shake with excitement. I had never gotten a gift before and never expected one. The feeling of excitement was something that I hadn't had much experience with. She paused for a few more moments as I felt that I was about to burst. She finally revealed what looked like a light brown mass, the color of a dying tree. She smiled as she handed it to me. It felt smooth and almost sticky. I pulled the edges apart to see that it was a new mask, but it was nothing like the ones that I'd had before. This one had actual facial features, a mouth with lips, a nose like my mom's, and eyebrows. "I made it with rabbit skins," she said. "I thought you would like having one that looks like an actual face." I stared at it, trying to appear grateful but struggling to understand how I actually felt. "Well, try it on," she said. I did as she asked, pulling the thin leather across my head into my neck. It fit tightly against my head. The eye holes were perfectly situated so I wouldn't have to pull the mask down to see. "You probably won't want to wear it in the summer, but I tried to make it more comfortable and durable than your last one." I breathed in the gamey smell of the leather and pressed my tongue against the inside of my mouth. "Well, what do you think?" she asked. Thanks," I said, wishing that it looked more like Spider-Man's. Mom was always exhausted after a day of hunting, especially during the summer. It was almost impossible to wake her up. When she fell asleep, I snuck out of the cabin and into the woods. I followed the path, remembering what Monty said about their RV being 2 miles down the trail. As I walked in the darkness, I wondered why I was trying so hard to see this girl again. I had been fine living my whole life without anyone besides Mom, though I had begun to wonder if that feeling of complacency came from a secluded life. I had been walking around for half an hour when I heard voices a few yards away. I ducked into the nearby trees and spotted a fire that gave way to a dingy brown RV. Monty sat in a chair beside the fire while Jamie danced around it. I moved closer without meaning to, not realizing that I was no longer hidden. Jamie spotted me as she rounded the fire. I watched her say something to him before she came skipping towards me. "Hey, Spider-Man, I like your new mask." "Thanks," I said. My name is Nestor." I like Spider-Man better. Come on, I told my dad that I was going to pee, but I want to show you something." She grabbed my hand and pulled me into the woods. Her hand was soft and warm despite it being chilly that night. I still remember that. The temperature of her hand left an impression on mine that seemed to remain for years. We walked a few yards more until she stopped at a small ditch with a thin stream at the bottom. She smiled at me before sliding down to the edge of the stream. I paused before following. At the bottom, she caught my arm and stopped me from going face first into the creek. She laughed and I laughed back. "Look," she said, pointing in the creek. I scanned the surface of the dark water, unsure of what she was pointing at. "Tadpoles," she said with excitement. I looked again, and in the moon's reflection, I saw tiny black dots swimming near the edge of the creek. "They'll grow legs soon," she said. "That's what I learned in school. Do you go to school?" I shook my head. "Yeah, I'm not right now, but my dad said I can go back soon, when we leave the woods." Despite not knowing her well, the thought of her leaving made my chest hurt. "Jamie!" cried Monty from somewhere in the woods. "I gotta go," she said softly. "Come visit me again. Just whistle 3 times and I'll come find you in the woods." She climbed up the ditch and waved before disappearing. I only went to visit her on the nights that my mom was exhausted. Sometimes Jamie was already in bed when I arrived. We only saw each other once every couple of weeks, but the times we saw each other made up for all the time away that I wanted to see her. Seeing her was like seeing sunshine after weeks of rain. On these late-night meetings, Jamie told me all about her life out of the woods, the friends she had back in her hometown, the restaurants that she missed, the afternoons she spent at their local library reading whichever book had the coolest cover. "Have you ever read The Boxcar Children?" she asked me one night. I shook my head. My mom had a small collection of books and most were too long for me to be interested in. The only 3 that I had read from her collection were ones about local wildlife and an old cookbook with faded letters. "Whenever I leave, you can visit me and I'll let you borrow it," she said while hitting tall blades of grass with a stick. "I have the whole collection. Oh, and we can go to the movies. I love going to the movies. I used to go all the time with my mom and dad before they broke up." "Broke up?" I asked. "Yeah, it's like when adults decide they don't like each other anymore, so they stop living together." She knew so much more than me about movies, books, the world, everything. "You've really lived out here your whole life, Spider-Man?" she asked. "Yeah, I think so," I said. "That's cool. You're like this guy in the movie called Tarzan, except you weren't raised by gorillas, right?" She laughed. We found a clearing and sat in the cool grass. Fireflies flew around the tall grass like embers. We looked at each other and she smiled and I smiled back. She picked at the grass to her side, randomly glancing at me. "Why do you wear a mask?" she asked, not looking up at me. I knew that it would come up eventually, though I liked how long she had gone before asking. "My mom says something bad will happen," I said, wondering if I should have come up with a cooler reason. She picked at the grass for a few more seconds before standing up and dusting her hands. "Works for me," she said before offering her hand to help me up. And as we stood in the moonlight, I knew there was no way my face was nearly as nice as hers. We had met each other every few weeks for around a year without either of us getting caught, and I got the feeling that her dad wouldn't care as much as my mom would. One night when I came back, my mom was waiting in the yard staring into the woods. She spotted me and her eyes grew wide with anger. "Where the hell were you?" she cried, moving towards me like an angry bull. She grabbed me by the shoulders and tried to look in my eyes, but I refused to meet them. "Just out for a walk," I said. "You were meeting that girl, weren't you? You know we can't trust them." I pulled away from my mom and she stepped back, surprised. "What's wrong with you?" she asked. "She's my friend, my only friend." "I thought I was your friend," she returned, her voice dropping. I paused. "Friends don't keep secrets from each other. You don't tell me anything." Mom looked at the ground. I could see the thoughts racing through her head. She was considering something. "Why do we have to stay here?" I asked. "Why can't I have friends? Why can't I go to school? Why do I have to wear a mask?" Mom bit her lip and her eyes met mine. They were red and ready to break with tears. I waited for an answer, hoping that she'd finally decided to share something with me. She gripped her fists and then released them. She sighed and started back to the cabin, leaving me where I was standing. "Keep playing with her if you want," she said. "Just keep your mask on." Another year or so passed. I was still frustrated with my mom for not sharing more information with me, but I was happy that I didn't have to sneak out to meet Jamie. We even started meeting in the daylight, making it much easier to explore the woods together. I showed her all the things that I'd learned over the years, about how to identify poisonous plants, how to find your way home if you get lost, and how to track animals. "Wow, you know a lot about the woods," she said. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I shrugged. "Will you teach me how to shoot a bow and arrow?" she asked. Mom had just taught me, so I wasn't sure how well I could teach her. However, the pleas in her eyes kept me from saying no. We found a spot near a clearing in the woods where my mom would often hunt for quails. We ducked behind a log and I set up the bow and arrow on top of it. A small flock of quail bobbed in and out of the tall grass. I picked a large one closer to us than the rest and I aimed the arrow just as Mom had taught me. The quail bobbed again and I took a deep breath before letting the arrow go. The flock flew into the air, leaving the arrow on the ground, pointed towards the sky. We walked to the clearing and found the quail struck through its chest with the arrow. "That was amazing," she cried. "I want to try." It was the first animal that I had ever killed on my own, and I loved that Jamie was here to see it. It made me realize that I wanted her there for all the big moments in my life. And we went back to the log with my quail and hid. An hour or so passed before the flock returned and started picking at seeds and insects on the ground. I handed Jamie the bow and arrow. "What do I do?" she asked, holding the bow and arrow at her sides. "Oh, you have to show me, silly." I awkwardly moved towards her and placed my arms around her shoulders. I lifted her arm with the arrow and then the one with the bow. I positioned them in the right spots, slowly. Her hair smelled like sweat and dirt, but I liked it. You have to aim and take a breath before shooting," I said. "You need to make sure you're completely relaxing, and taking a breath helps." "Okay," she said. "How far do I pull the string back?" I gulped before putting my hand over hers. She breathed quickly as if I scared her, but quickly settled into my arms. I cut my hand around hers and pulled the string back. She looked at me and smiled. "I think I got it," she said. I moved away as I noticed my heart beating harder than it ever had. She aimed the arrow and took a breath. She let it go and the flock flew away. We both watched the arrow for a moment and saw it move. We ran to it and saw the quail shot on the side. I pulled the arrow out and the tiny bird struggled to move away from us. "Oh no," she said. I could see her starting to cry. "It's okay," I said, picking up the quail and holding it between us. "Do you think that we can help?" Before she could finish her thought, I twisted the bird's neck and it went limp. I held it up and she stared at me wide-eyed. I cocked my head at her, but she looked away. "It's okay, you can keep it," she said. We spent the rest of that day at a clearing close to our campsite. She poked at rocks with her pocket knife and stared at the forest, not saying anything. I was about to ask her what was wrong when she dropped her head and began sobbing. "What's wrong?" I asked. She looked back up and then to me. "I want to go home." I dropped my head. "I know my dad is hiding me from my mom. He picked me up from school one day and told me that we were going on a fun trip and that we would go home soon. I believed him for a long time, but I'm not a stupid kid anymore. I miss my mom, I miss my old friends." I know she didn't mean to make me feel bad, but hearing all this hurt. I thought she was happy out here with me and that all we needed was each other. "I want to leave," she said, "and I want you to go with me." I sat back. "What? I can't leave." She pursed her lips and set her head on her knees. "Why do you wear that mask?" "I have to." "Well, because your mom says." I paused and then nodded. "Your mom's lying just like my dad is. I bet you $1 million that nothing will happen if you take off your mask right now." She moved her hand towards me and gripped the neck of the mask. I pulled back and she let go. She paused and tried again, and this time I allowed her to untie the twine. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as she gently pulled upwards on the mask, careful to avoid yanking too hard around my nose and eyes. Everything went black as the last bit of the mask traveled up my face, but then Jamie's smiling face greeted me with the sun behind it. We stared at each other for several moments. "You see, nothing," she said, "and you don't even have any hideous scars or anything." "Really?" I asked. She shook her head and then leaned in, kissing me on the lips. My eyes widened in surprise for a moment, but I quickly relaxed as it felt right. Perfect. She pulled away and smiled again. My smile was so big that my cheeks started to hurt. "Let's leave, tonight," she said. "Tonight?" She nodded. "I can grab food and stuff to last us a while, and you can use your forest knowledge to lead us back to the road. Some adults will have to pick up some kids they see on the side of the road. I'll tell him where my mom lives and we can go back there." "Your mom would let me stay?" I asked. She nodded. "Well, of course." She stood up and offered her hand to me. I took it and pulled myself up. "Meet me here when the moon is in the center of the sky," she said. 1,000 thoughts went through my mind as I stood there, holding Jamie's hand. I wondered if this was really a good idea, if my mom would be okay without me, if I was ready to leave the woods. But I knew that I could do all of it as long as I was with Jamie. I nodded. She started out of the clearing with me a few feet behind her. She paused, causing me to stop. She stood still for several seconds with her arms at her sides, the pocket knife in her hand shaking. "Jamie, are you okay?" She turned to me with wide eyes and her mouth clenched. "Jamie." I moved towards her, but she lifted the knife. I stood frozen as she moved it towards her head, holding it a few inches from her cheek. "Jay." She stuck the knife deep in her face and I screamed. She pulled against the handle, dragging the blade along her face. I ran to stop her, but a kick to my stomach sent me to the ground. Jamie continued cutting her face, dragging it along her forehead and down to her ears. I leapt up to stop her again, but again and again she managed to keep me away while continuing to slice her flesh. "Jamie!" cried a voice from the woods. Monty distracted me for a moment as he came running into the clearing from behind me. "I heard a scream," he said while approaching, and noticed the knife in Jamie's hand and the blood running down her neck. "Jamie!" he cried. He ran quickly towards her, glancing at me along the way. He paused a few feet behind me and I stood between the two of them as the horrible sounds of Jamie's knife still working down her face filled my ears and made my legs immobile. Monty stared blank-faced at me for a moment, and then dug into his pocket without looking down. He pulled out a much larger knife than Jamie's and stuck it into his own cheek, starting to cut along the same pattern that she had. I clocked the silence from behind me and turned. I didn't want to see what Jamie had done, but I couldn't stop myself. My brain wanted to leave as quickly as I could, but something buried deep told me to look. I looked upon a bloody mess of musculature. Her eyelids were still there, though she didn't blink. Her nose was gone, as were her lips, revealing 2 rows of small teeth. The sounds of Monty continuing to slice sounded behind me as my eyes traveled down Jamie's body. At her side, I saw what was left of her face. She lifted her arm and held it up to me. It looked like I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Instead, I ran as fast as I could back to the cabin, pulling my mask back over my face along the way. Mom was peeling the husks from some corn when I ran into the yard. I stumbled to the ground and she ran over. The inside of my mask was soaked with tears and I was having trouble breathing it in. "Nestor, what's wrong?" she asked, kneeling in front of me. Her fingers drifted to the untied twine at the bottom of my neck. "Oh no," she said. Did she see your face?" "They're still alive. We can take them out of the woods." "It's too late for them, son. I'm sorry." I cried violently for another few moments and then looked at my mom. "When you said something bad would happen if somebody saw my face, you didn't mean something bad would happen to me, did you?" I sat in the kitchen while Mom brought me a cool glass of water. I could tell that she was stalling, but I didn't care. Everything was wrong and nothing she said would make it better. She sat in front of me and grabbed my hand. "I didn't want to tell you. I hoped I would never have to." She looked from side to side and then at me. "In the town I grew up in, this small place on the other side of the woods, there were stories of things in the forest. Things that only showed themselves when they wanted to be seen. Spirits, ghosts, monsters. Natives had a name for this particular brand of spirits that I can't remember," she continued. Us in town always just called them face stealers. My heart stopped beating for a moment. The folks said if you looked at their faces, they would take yours. All of us kids figured they were just stories meant to keep us from wandering too far into the woods. That's what adults do, right? Tell kids fibs to keep them from getting hurt. Well, that's what I learned to do, Nestor, and I'm wondering if it was right. I'm wondering if I should have just told you this stuff from the beginning. She sighed. I wanted to say something, but my mind couldn't find the words. I spent most of my life believing that there was no such thing as magic and things were only the way that you saw them, Mom said before pausing and looking at me. One day I was walking in the woods just trying to clear my head. I might have wandered farther than I should have, but I grew up around the trees. I knew how to find my way back. As I was fixing to turn around, I noticed a man a few yards away from me off the trail. I didn't think nothing of it at first, figured that he was out hunting or something like that. But when he turned to me, his face was missing, cut clean off, took everything except his teeth and ears. My hand started to shake. I didn't want to believe anything she was saying, but the image of Jamie's skinless face refused to leave my head. I started walking backwards thinking this man must have lost his mind, but it started to occur to me that maybe all those stories I thought were bullshit actually had some truth to them. She looked at me and then away. It was the first time that I had ever heard her curse. I kept moving away from the man when I saw this small body facing away from me, a few yards away off the trail. A kid, no older than 2 or 3, completely naked in the woods by themselves. I walked towards them thinking that they might be in danger from the man, but then I saw it. A clump of skin on the ground in a pile like some messed up anthill. The holes for his eyes were the only thing I saw before turning away. I didn't know what to do. I thought about just leaving you out there, but then you started to cry, a painful cry that broke my heart. I couldn't have kids of my own, but she swallowed her saliva. I wrapped my outside shirt over your head and I picked you up. And when you wrapped your tiny arms around my neck, I knew that I had to protect you. So I just kept walking deeper and deeper into the woods, not knowing what to do but hoping that I would figure it out along the way. She answered the first question that I had without me having to say anything. I don't know who left you there or why, she said. I wondered if your real parents would ever come looking for you. And maybe that's partly why I wanted us to stay as hidden as we could. Her eyes drifted to me. There was a long, heavy silence. Nestor, she started. I don't want to ask, son, but I think that I have to. When your friend did what she did you like it? Of course I didn't like it, I thought as I wandered back through the woods. I didn't have time to examine my emotions at the moment though. I thought that I was terrified, but had I confused excitement for terror? The sun was beginning to set when I made it to the spot where Jamie and Monty lay. They were both on their backs and their bodies still against the bright green grass. I warily approached, not wanting to see what had become of their faces, but unable to stop myself. I stopped just shy of their bodies and noticed something on the ground. A small mound of pink flesh stared back at me, and I knew that it was her face. I didn't move for a few moments, my stomach turning at the idea of what her face might look like detached from her body. But still I moved towards it, seeing a few insects had begun picking away at the flesh. I picked it up and dusting the small creatures away while feeling the softness of the flesh between my fingers. As the stinky blood coated my palms, I felt the side of my mouth begin to curl into a smile. I gasped and dropped Jamie's face before running away from the scene, wiping the blood from my hands onto my pants. I sat in my room staring at the wall for a long time. My body still buzzed from the feeling of Jamie's face between my fingers. The fear and sickness had all disappeared, instead replaced with an elation that I had never experienced. My body felt light, and the constant fear and anxiety that usually filled my brain had gone away. I felt confident and more intelligent, though it seemed impossible at the time. I sat with the feeling, not wanting it to leave. However, when it did, I felt worse than I ever had. A dark cloud seemed to surround my head as my body felt heavy and bound to the space around me. The realization that I would never see my best friend again came rushing into me, and the guilt of knowing that I had caused her death made me wish that I were the one lying lifeless in the grass instead of her. I cried for the next few hours until it felt like I had no tears left. My mom had come by to check on me several times but avoided coming into my room. "Just let me know if you need something, okay?" she had asked once. I heard her move to her room and shut the door. She never closed her room at night before that day. I could tell there was something different about her, and it had become more evident over the next few days. She no longer walked around the house like an authority figure, but more like someone trying to avoid eye contact with a mean dog. She never brought up the incident again, and I was thankful for that. The guilt of killing Jamie never went away, though neither did the remembrance of that ecstasy that I experienced afterwards. It created a temptation in me to go out and find someone else to whom I could show my face. It became a regular craving. Usually it was more like one might crave sugar after going a long time without any, but some nights it was almost comparable to starvation. It became so bad that one day I saw my mom working outside, busy and distracted with chores. I approached from behind and started removing my mask without thinking. My mom heard me approach and spun around, dropping the garden hoe that she had been using. The look of fear in her face, the woman who had ensured my survival, who had loved me despite knowing that I was a monster, seeing her that terrified of me, it almost hurt worse than Jamie. Mom slept with a chair against her door that night and for most nights after. While she was sleeping one night, I snuck into her craft room, spotting a large needle that she used on leather. I grabbed it, taking a thick roll of twine as well. Jamie's face flashed in my mind. First, her face the first time that I had met her, followed by the last time. I knew it was horrible, but my emotions and my brain weren't matching, and at the time I felt like my brain was right. If the cravings weren't going to stop, then I needed to prevent my mask from ever coming off again. I took the needle and twine and held them to my neck for a moment before taking a deep breath. The needle punctured my skin, and then the mask leather. I cringed as the twine slid down my flesh and felt every centimeter of its rough edges scraping the inside of my skin. Lines of crimson fell from every puncture in my neck. The harsh stinging I had felt when I first punctured my skin had become a dull pain. For the first time in my life, the mask felt warm and comforting. I breathed in its leathery smell before lying back on my bed, thankful that I would never hurt anyone like I'd hurt Jamie. My bed is much more comfortable these days. I invested in a weighted blanket and a goose down pillow, and you can truly tell the difference. In a month, it'll be 10 years since I left the woods. Mom died a year prior, and being out there by myself, well, it was lonelier than I can describe though. On some nights, I would give a lot of money for the peace and quiet of the woods. My apartment overlooks a bustling downtown area, and while the view is amazing, the noise of the city can be a bit overwhelming at times. Thank God for the noise-canceling headphones that my ex-girlfriend gifted me for Christmas last year. Though it's my day off, I decided to do some cleaning. I never got around to hiring a new cleaner, and the place has become a bit of a sty. I go to the bathroom and look in the mirror for a moment, seeing my night mask staring back at me. It's more lucid than any of the masks that I had growing up, but thick enough to prevent me from seeing my actual face. This mask is milky white and made of a thin plastic. It only covers my face, leaving my hair, ears, and neck visible. The scars where I had sewn that old mask on became a pale white over the years. No one ever asked about them though. There were only a few people who had ever seen me with my shirt off. Lining the bathroom counter are several other masks, ones that I made myself from materials that I've collected over the years. I've been perfecting them since leaving the woods. I was able to get away with crude masks for a while, using the excuse of having bad scarring, but I realized how much better it was to get close to someone before doing what I had to do. And people want something that they can see, eyes that react to them, lips that move, and cheeks that wrinkle when smiling. I think I've almost got my masks perfect. They contour to every crease of my face and match my skin color perfectly. Only sometimes will someone notice something off about my face. Maybe they spot a plasticky sheen to the synthetic skin or see makeup lines around my lips or eyes. They only make a look of concern and continue about their day, wondering if what they saw was only their imagination. I decide to clean my room first, starting with the mess of clothes in the closet. Before getting started though, I decide to reminisce and drag out the leather box near the back corner of the closet. I place it on my bed and pull the flap open. A smile climbs up my cheeks. I've managed to preserve most of them, with the latest ones being those of my ex-girlfriend and the cleaners. There are 23 in total, but I have plans for several more, so I'm probably going to need to find a better storage system. Seeing all the empty eye sockets and jagged edges of the faces always makes me feel a slight amount of the elation I felt upon taking them. It also makes me sad though. Sad that I didn't go back for her face before the forest took it. That can't be the number. It just can't, Wes said, taking off his faded John Deere hat and slapping it against his leg. I dried the corn before I hauled it over. I know what the moisture level is. Wes, I'm just the messenger. The machine checks it and gives me back a level. Well, your gosh darn machine must be broken. It's just recently been recalibrated. I can run another sample if you want. Wes sighed. Years worth of anxiety exhaled in a moment. Y'all know how tough it's been for us. You dock off 10 cents a bushel and it barely is enough to cover costs. If you want to try the Grainco elevator, they might give you a better level. They're still using an older moisture system and might not dock as much. Wes shook his head. Cost of the gas driving to a new location will eat into the margins, Wes said, putting the cap back on. You people are the reason the family farms are dying. I'm just a lowly nighttime agent at a grain elevator. People above my pay grade set the prices, Wes. I run the machine. Wish that I had a say in this, I really do. The aging farmer paced, mumbling to himself as he did, trying to shake loose the anger from his body. His snit was moderate compared to others. One guy took a swing at me. Truth was, they all were right. The moisture limits were off, and the big ag company I worked for wanted to maximize profits by shortchanging farmers. Every night I stared into the eyes of broken men and gave them bad news. It ate at my soul. I was a force multiplier for misery. Oh, Jesus Christ and his crown of thorns, Wes finally said. Just take the corn. I'll figure something out. I'm sorry, Wes, truly. He waved me off. I don't want to hear it. Just take it. I'll be in my truck. He slammed the door as he left. It rattled the windows and knocked small knickknacks off my desk. As soon as he stormed off, my boss's office door squeaked open. "He gone?" he asked from the safety of his office. "Yep." The door opened wide, and Larry, my fastidious boss, walked out laughing. "Oh, thank God he left. He seemed heated." The faint smell of whiskey followed Larry's arrival. Larry took nips from a flask all the time and assumed that he was getting away with it. Larry was wrong. A common occurrence around here. He is heated, and he isn't alone. I've heard it all night. "They'll learn to love the new rates," Larry said, staring through the blinds, "or their corn will rot." Blood whooshed in my ears and I gripped my teeth. My tongue was begging to give out a lashing, but I held it firm. There wasn't a ton of decent paying gigs in this town anymore, and I needed a place where I could study in peace. The night shift at the grain elevator was the perfect spot for me. Speaking of rot, around near Silo 10 I caught a funky, musty smell earlier. When you get a chance, go check it out. No sensor warnings and I didn't feel any heat. It's still worth a glance though. I can't have a fire now. Margins are tighter than a honey hole. A disgusting metaphor aside, he wasn't wrong. The price changes had wrecked everybody down the line, save the big ag companies. I glanced out at Wes, muttering to himself outside. Should we try to smooth things over? Larry, still lingering at the window, shook his head. "No, I'm not going down there," he said, turning to me. "But it might not hurt for you to smooth things over. We can't have everybody run into the Grainco elevator." What should I tell him? "I don't know, the rates are temporary. We understand his frustration. Things will get back to normal soon," stuff like that. "Are the rates temporary?" Larry laughed. "When have you ever heard of a company cutting into its profits on purpose?" "You want me to lie?" Don't be such a Boy Scout," Larry said, walking away from the window and grabbing the latest issue of Farm Worker magazine. "I gotta take the Browns to the Super Bowl. It's about to smell musty in here and it ain't gonna have nothing to do with wet corn," he said, cracking himself up. "Go on and get. I'll be a minute." He left for the bathroom and I sighed. Wes might sock me in the jaw, but whatever stench Larry was about to release in the bathroom would be worse. A bruised jaw was worth the risk. I zipped up my hoodie as soon as I got outside. Since fall had tiptoed closer, the nights at the complex had gone from pleasant to, "I don't really want to go out if I don't have to." My breath was visible and the cold stung my nose and the tips of my ears. The wind rustled through the fabric, sending shivers up my spine. I stuffed my hands into my pockets and I made my way over to Wes. He had parked his rig over the dump gate and was in the process of opening the bottom hatch of his truck. Once he caught me heading toward him, he stopped. The cold had helped to extinguish his fury. The man was more apologetic than mad. "I hate the winter," I said as a way of greeting. Same. My hands get so chapped that they bleed, even with gloves on. I envy the bears who get to hibernate through this shit." Wes smiled and his shoulders dropped. His eyes went to the ground, letting his thoughts gather steam, before bringing them level with me. "Oh, sorry about in there." I held up my hands. "Don't, I get it. So many farmers have goddamned me lately that I'm starting to wonder if the big man has agreed to help. A lot of God-fearing folks forget the Lord don't like his name taken in vain." "Amen," I said. "I get why, but I'm just a dude that pushes a button. Forces larger than me are calling all the shots." Wes nodded. "I can't imagine it's easy. There are worse fates, but I hate disappointing folks. Be straight with me. Why did they raise the moisture level barrier?" I shrugged. "Money?" Wes spat. "I can't wring blood from a gosh darn stone. They're gonna squeeze though. Squeeze too hard and you break the rock." "You're right." I should have sold the farm last year, Wes said, resigned. I offered more than what it was worth. Told my pappy about the offer, and the man damn near shed a tear at the thought of us moving on. That man lost a finger and his eyes didn't even well up once. How's he been? Wes waggled his hand. Has good days and bad, but it's all on a downhill slope. It's spread to his lungs, and just a matter of time now. Sorry about that, I said, patting his shoulder. I lost my dad 2 years ago, and I still feel the hurt. Wes nodded thanks and turned away. He wiped away a tear, but I wasn't going to call it out. We all need to grieve. You want me to fire it up? Yes, sir, he said over his shoulder. He unlatched the bottom hatch of his truck, and the flow of thousands of corn kernels filled the night air. A grain elevator is exactly what it sounds like. Farmers park their trucks over a grate, let the seeds fall into a pit where a belt with little platforms drags the corn up to the top of a silo. Our elevator has 16 silos on site, and come harvest season, they'll all fill up. That's when the money comes in. It's also when things get dangerous. You wouldn't think that grain storage is a high-risk job, and mostly you'd be right. But dust stalks the silos. Falling from heights is frequent enough. Sometimes the air is putrid from unseen decaying matter. And worse, fine dust and built-up gases ignite and explode. About a year ago, 2 towns over, a silo exploded. Stuffed with hardened kernels, it was like an industrial-level pipe bomb. Killed a guy. You hear about that farmhand at the Braverman farm? Wes had asked. No, what happened? The belt below us squeaked. If you closed your eyes, the corn mover sounded like a rain stick. It could be pleasant. Less so if you hear it settle from inside a silo. If you're close enough to hear millions of kernels slide around, it'll be the last thing that you hear. Oh, he was breaking up a crust and he slipped inside. He was dead before the paramedics got there, Wes said, crossing himself. I wasn't wearing his harness either. 5 seconds to get trapped, 30 to die, Wes said. I don't even think it took that long. Moisture is the enemy in the bins. The corn can clump together and crust over a void. You step on that and you tumble down. Millions of kernels collapse. The weight crushes you into a pancake. You go in the grain and odds are you don't come out. I don't know about you, but $16 an hour with no benefits ain't worth being crushed to death by corn kernels. Braverman always cuts corners, I said. Can't say I'm shocked. Costly mistake. The family's gonna sue, surprised if Braverman doesn't just sell the land and call it a day. And Granco's been sniffing around anyhow. I offered Wes a cigarette and he took it. We moved away from the clanking elevator to talk in a quieter place. Ducked behind the office and lit up like we were 2 high school kids hiding from our parents. You're in school, right? Yes, sir, trying to finish off my business degree. You want to work in agriculture? I want to stay as far away from ag as possible, I said, taking a drag. I'd like to get out of this area altogether, if I can help it. Is your mama gonna miss you? Nah, she's living her life. Bingo almost every night with friends. I went once and she didn't hit. Called me a cooler and said that I couldn't come back. Wes laughed. That's a blunt assessment. That's Mama. The woman doesn't let a topic pass without speaking her piece on it. Off in the distance, someone slammed a stick against the side of a silo. The reverberations echoed in the dark. Wes and I looked at one another to confirm that we had both heard the same thing. What the hell was that? Probably teens messing around. Ain't much to do around here except drink and raise a little cane. And Grant Platt told me the other night that somebody came and put up about 6 scarecrows in his fields. Noticed them that evening, but when he went to get them in the morning, they were gone. I took a drag off my smoke and tried to hide my concern. Truth was, the last few weeks, I'd been hearing noises around the complex. Shuffling, banging, whispers. The noises were odd, sure, but nothing to call a preacher about. What was curious, though, was where they were coming from. The rows of silos. Everywhere, too. Near the base, at the top, along the sides. Banging against the walls like somebody was trapped inside. Industrial complexes are rife with odd sights and sounds, but something about these didn't sit right with me. I mentioned it to Larry the other day, but he wasn't too concerned. Told me that it was the corn settling in the silos. I didn't buy it, but since I had zero desire to go inside and investigate, I let it go. Silo 10 was the epicenter. I asked my boy about the scarecrow thing, and he mentioned it being some social media trend. He said, shaking his head in disgust. A way to scare people and record their reactions. Sounds mean to me, but the whole darn world seems to be trending that way these days. I heard the sound again. Someone dragged a stick against the metal ribbon at the bottom of the silos. Reminded me of a machine gun firing or a baseball card jammed in your bike spokes. I took another drag of my smoke and my hand twitched. Gotta be kids, I said, dropping my cigarette and crushing it under my boot. Let's put the fear of God into them. Wes nodded. When in doubt, turn to the good book. We headed toward the silos, moving fast and as quietly as boots on gravel could be. Whispering voices found our ears. Teens. When we got to the silo where they were hiding, I rapped my hand against it. The dull thud echoed around us. A few people tried to suppress their laughter. It was coming from the next silo over. It was kids messing around. Though a weight had lifted off my shoulders, smoldering anger replaced the void. I had enough shit to deal with, and I didn't need to add running off clout-chasing teens to my list. I motioned for Wes to go around the silo counterclockwise and sneak up on them from behind. Let the man surprise them and give them a taste of their own medicine. I would go the opposite direction and hopefully catch them. If they ran well, I was gonna let them run. I don't get paid to chase people down. The kids shushed each other and dragged that stick against these silos' ribs again. This time they went slowly, the dead end ringing like a cracked church bell. I waited until they stopped and then took off, hoping to catch them in the act. As I rounded the corner, I came skidding to a stop on the gravel. A poorly made scarecrow loomed over me. He hung loosely from a stake and barely driven into the hardened ground. Even though I expected a scarecrow around the corner, the sight still surprised me. Oh shit, look at his face, one of the teen boys said from the shadows. He's scared as hell. Peals of laughter from about 4 boys and girls standing in the dark of Silo 11. This is private property. You can't be back here. Oh, relax, bro. It was a dumb prank, a guy said, walking into the dim moonlight. He was wearing a Letterman jacket with so many patches that you would think that he had served in the military, not the track team. Oh, it's just for fun. A girl said, not brave enough to walk into the light. We didn't mean nothing by it. The large fellow walked up next to his friend, big all over with a head the size of a backpack. He laughed, raspy and halting like a man straining to breathe, and he waved his hand in front of his face. How do you work here, bro? These silos smell like 10 kinds of ass. Maybe he likes the smell of ass, the Letterman said, pointing and laughing. They all chuckled and blood rushed to my cheeks. You trying to get this man in trouble with his boss, Wes said, stepping out of the shadows. They jumped worse than I had. A little revenge isn't so bad. Ain't justice, just revenge flipped upside down. Jesus Christ, the kid said. Watch your mouth, Dennis Temple, Wes said, his deepened dad voice coming out. Oh yeah, I know who you are, who all of you are. He turned his attention back to Dennis. I know your pa didn't raise you to blaspheme the Lord's name or curse out at strangers now, did he? No, sir, he didn't, Dennis said, his eyes on the ground. How many of y'all are there? After a few seconds, 2 girls in matching red hoodies walked out. Wes shook his head. I can't imagine none of y'all's parents would think highly of you bothering a working man just trying to earn his daily bread, Wes said, pulling the scarecrow out of the ground and handing it over. Think your pa would be happy with somebody screwing with him at the mill? No, sir. Apologize to this man, erase that video, and get on back home. And Dennis in his gaggle turned to me and mumbled apologies, and then he erased the video, holding up his phone to prove that he did. Once Wes was happy with the responses, he softened. Now there ain't nothing wrong with having fun, just not at someone else's expense. We were young once and we did our fair share of rabble-rousing. Just don't do it at some innocent man's expense. Y'all understand? Yes, sir, Dennis said. He turned to me. Sorry, man, I meant nothing by it. I softened. I just don't want to see anybody get hurt. This is a dangerous place. Our alarm system squawking drowned my voice out. Red lights started blinking on top of the silos. We both glanced up and a sinking sensation rumbled in my stomach. I turned to the now genuinely nervous teens and shooed them away. They didn't hesitate. Wes craned his head up to the lights. What's that mean? Honestly, I've never heard them go off. In the distance, the office door slammed open, Larry's booming voice calling out. I turned to Wes. I don't think he's in a good mood. The devil has more good times than old Larry. We started back for the office. As soon as we came out of the line of silos, Larry pointed his folded magazine at me. Where the hell were you? Chasing off a few kids that had snuck onto the property. Why are the alarms going off? Something wrong with the elevator. It's what alarms usually mean, don't it? And you say you're in college, huh? Larry said, shaking his head. Useless as teats on a boar hog. I've never seen them go off before is all, I said, swallowing my anger. Don't sweat it, son, Wes said, patting me on the back and nodding at Larry. Larry never even finished high school, and look where he is. I chuckled and Larry fumed. The friendly joke got under his skin. Wes was needling and found a vein. It was Larry's turn to strike. If your wet corn broke my machine, repairs are going to come out of your pocket, Larry said, attempting a joke. It Hindenburged and we walked to the elevator in silence. Once there, it was obvious that something had jammed up the works because the belts weren't moving anymore. Wes's corn had emptied from his truck and was now all in the underground storage pit. A rock or something scooped up from the harvest might have found its way into the elevator and got stuck. I'll shut down the power and climb into the pit to get a look. If there's a jam, it's gotta be in there, Larry said. He handed me a flashlight and nodded down at the pit access hatch. I can't wait, I said, taking the flashlight. There was a ping as my feet hit each rung. There's no light down here because there isn't any need. The corn falls and the elevator belts scoop it up. Colonels don't need to see the elevator to catch it. They just get swept away. I had only come down here a few times and that was more than enough. The ground slopes toward the belt, so once you get off the ladder, you have to crab walk to stay stable. If there was a clog, it was probably where the belt goes vertical, delivering the kernels up to another conveyor belt where they ride until they're dumped into a silo. Those turns on the conveyor belts are notorious for clogs and are hard to fix without the proper tools. Operators and agents can try to dig out the clogs, but it doesn't go well. Repairmen call them finger strippers for a reason. I hit the bottom rung and my feet slid out from under me as I stepped down to the cement floor. I shone the light at the elevator. There wasn't much corn left, but there was still enough that it piled near the belt. I skinned my light along the bottom of the ramp, looking for any obstruction. What's the holdup? Larry yelled down, his dumb voice echoing in the pit. So far so good, I yelled back. Gonna get a closer look at the belts. Don't go too close, I don't want OSHA in our business. I rolled my eyes and took another step down the steep slope. My foot skidded in some loose dirt, but I caught myself before I face-planted. I chuckled at my luck inside. Screw this whole freaking complex. As I dragged the light across the backside of the elevator, something dull and gray came into view. It was enough to get me closer. Inching along, I finally reached the belt and placed a hand down it for stability. What in the world is that? In the pit's dark, I spied a split-open gray watermelon half buried in corn kernels. It must have been there for a while because the smell of rot grew with each inch that I got closer. I tucked my nose into my shirt. There's something weird down here, I yelled up. Yeah, you, Larry said, laughing to himself. I ignored him and shifted my light to the right. A blackened, twisted vine snaked out from the watermelon. A seed germinating down here wasn't impossible, but to grow to this size. I followed the vine until it ended at a pile of clothes. I was about to reach over and grab them when the flashlight beam bounced off a pair of coal-black eyes. Oh shit. My fingers loosened and I dropped the flashlight, shutting it off. I scrambled back up the incline, but my foot caught on some loose kernels, and I fell face first into the concrete. My teeth caught against my tongue and my mouth filled with the coppery tang of blood. My smashed nose stung, and the gushing painted my lips and chin crimson. I had a hard time breathing without my nostrils whistling like a bored kid in church. Shaking off my growing ailments, I scrambled up the ladder, burst out of the top, and rolled away from the hole. I was breathing like I had run a marathon, pitched forward with my hands on my knees. Blood from my nose was pooling on the dirt in front of me. What the hell is wrong? Larry asked. What happened? There's something down there. What? I saw eyes. You sure it's not a raccoon? We got raccoons down there all the time. Hate those thieving things. I know what a raccoon looks like, I snapped, pinching the bridge of my nose to staunch the bleeding. It did little, but I convinced myself that it was working. There was a watermelon and something. Did you leave my flashlight down there? Larry, some grace, please, Wes said, his tone scolding. What? This boy couldn't organize a hen raffle at a poultry farm. The hell does that mean? I snapped. A stern glower from my boss recalibrated my emotions. Sorry, I'm hurting is all. You okay, kid? Wes asked. No, but I'll live, I said, touching my nostril to see if there was fresh blood still flowing. Sorry I dropped your flashlight, but I didn't want to get stabbed. What, did you see a weapon? Larry asked. I shook my head no. Then what are you worried about, son? I was startled it happened so fast. Startled is a fancy word for scared. Fine, I was scared, Larry. You wouldn't be. Larry's scared of missing a meal, but that's about it, Wes said with a grin. Before Larry could shoot back, Wes held up his hands and gave him an affable grin. Oh, just funnin', big guy. Kid, let me take a gander, huh? Wes walked over to the hole, pulled out his phone, and stuck his head down. The light wasn't as strong, but it did the work because he caught the eyes staring out at him too. Well, I'll be pickled, he mumbled. Hey, what are you doing down there? No response was forthcoming. Without hesitating, Wes climbed down into the pit. Hey, you can't go down there, it's a liability thing, Larry yelled to no avail. Seconds later, belly laughs came rousing up. What's so funny? Larry yelled down. There's a clown in there. Oh, there is someone down here, all right. I'll bring him up. I inched closer. My mouth went arid, the moisture sliding to my clammy palms. Finally, Wes came up, trailing someone behind him. As he breached the hole, he yanked up a scarecrow with him. He tossed it on the ground between Larry and me. Here's your culprit. Oh, hell's bells, kid. You were afraid of a scarecrow, Larry said in between guffaws. I didn't know it was a scarecrow. You didn't even investigate. Even the crows check out scarecrows. How you gonna make it in the city if you can't handle a straw man? Why was it down there? I turned to Wes. Was it in your truck and fell through? No way. Those kids, maybe. When would they get down there? Well, heck, I don't know. This scarecrow was different from the one that the kids had brought. Theirs was obviously handmade and not very well. Super understuffed with hay. Visible safety pins held the pants to the shirt, to the pillowcase head. Someone crudely drew on the face, made a real mess with the eyes and mouth. This one wasn't that. Outside the mangling that it had taken in the elevator belts, it was pristine. The outfit was a pair of old blue jeans and a gingham shirt with no visible pins. The clothes were so evenly stuffed with hay that they resembled a real person's body, muscles and everything. The head was an old burlap sack with black buttons sewn on for eyes and cinched with an ancient length of weather-beaten rope. A jack-o'-lantern's shark-tooth grin stitched in with white thread. Something that you would show off at the county fair, not drop in a grain elevator pit where nobody would see it. Oh, whatever it is, it's out now. I'm restarting the machine and finishing this up, Larry said as he turned to head back into the office. But then he froze. He shot his hand up and pointed to the top of a silo. Is that a person up there? Wes and I followed his finger to the top of Silo 10. The only light up there was the blinking red alarm, but it was enough to outline a person. They weren't moving, just sitting, shoeless feet dangling, and holding on to the light structure. What in tarnation? Jesus, if they fall, we're screwed, Larry said in a panic. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Get down now. The figure leaned back, their hands letting go, and they tipped off the top of the silo. Oh shit, Larry said, sprinting. He got there first and came skidding to a stop, sending gravel skipping down the path. I tried to read his face. Was he looking at a horror show? But his dropped jaw and raised eyebrows weren't sending that message. The hell? Wes and I joined him at his side, and the same wave of confusion caught us in its wake. I shook my head hoping to get my synapses firing correctly, but nothing changed. We were staring at the body of another scarecrow. Wes crossed himself. This ain't natural. Nothing tonight has been. I didn't bother with the divine. I was stuck on the logistics of how a person got onto the silo roof in the first place. We kept the silo ladders latched closed, and they still were. But even if the ladders had been unlatched, climbing on top of the silo was super dangerous in the best of conditions. Hauling up a scarecrow while trying to climb up would be damn near impossible. Who brought it up there? How? I said, meaning for it to remain in my mind, but the thought couldn't help but escape into the wider world. Larry's face went from disbelief to anger. Oh, someone's messing with us, and I don't like it one bit. He turned to me. Where did those kids go? Did you know their names? They left right after we confronted them. I saw them leave. I know them well enough to know that this ain't them, Wes said. I don't know what this is, but I know that I don't like it, and I'd like to finish my business and be on my way. Sure, Larry said, his rage cooling into simmering anger. I'll take care of ya. Kid, add this guy to the pile and burn them both. I don't want to hear anything more about scarecrows. The two of them left. I walked to the straw man. The fall had done some damage and an arm had fallen off on impact, but otherwise it was fine. I kicked it to ensure that it wasn't alive or anything. It wasn't, thank God. Hey, considering the fall should have killed you, you look okay. Off in the distance, the grain elevator started back up and I damn near jumped out of my skin. I turned back toward the office. Wes and Larry were standing near the truck scale and arguing over the price changes. The conversation was heated enough that a few spicy words were louder than the elevator's hum. "Larry, man, read the room." I turned back to the Scarecrow. Chills prickled down my spine. I didn't like this thing, and the urge to kill it and its pal with fire grew like corn in the summer. "Alright, dude, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here." And grabbing his hay-stuffed shirt sleeve, I had dragged his body about 2 feet when the Scarecrow let out a faint, painful groan. I dropped the arm. It bounced off the ground, lifeless. Still, I shuffled a few steps back, my eyes never leaving the body. What the hell was that? There was thunking again. I snapped my head toward the silo. Opposite me, somebody dragged a stick slowly against the ribs. I wanted to believe the kids had come back around for another attempt at the video, but my rapidly beating heart told me that that wasn't the case. Wes had laid into them pretty good, and like all teens, they feared getting in trouble. The hair on the back of my neck was at attention. Despite the cool evening, sweat rolled down my nose. I wiped my face with my already sweaty palms and dried them against my dusty pants. My spiking adrenaline made my body tremble. Run or fight. I closed my eyes and let my instincts choose for me. Instead of running off, something that my legs were screaming at my brain to do, I slapped the side of the silo myself. It wasn't as loud or intimidating, but it sent the message that I was still here, damn it. They wouldn't scare me off so easily. Pressing my body against the silo, the metal was warmer than normal. I still needed to check the internal temperature, but dealing with a Scarecrow-a-palooza was my top problem at the moment. I quietly slid along the metal. My goal was to surprise whoever was there. What I would do after that wasn't exactly clear to me yet. One problem at a time. I took baby steps, careful to not crunch on the gravel. The vibrations through the metal rippled through my body. I was sure that I was about to run into the person. I stilled and gathered my courage and ran toward my unseen foe, screaming bloody murder. The Scarecrow's detached arm fell to the ground as I came around the corner. I froze, my brain failing to put together what I had just witnessed. How was the arm moving? Straw feet kicked up gravel as the rest of the body ran away. I circled the silo just in time to catch the hayman turning off the gravel path and disappearing into the shadows. With my wits reaching their natural end, I pulled myself together and did the only sensible thing. I ran. I moved like this thing was chasing me. I hadn't run this fast in years and my body rejected the effort. Joints ached and my lungs burned, but I wasn't stopping until I got back to the office. I got there just as Wes was taking the check from Larry. They stared at me like I had two heads. Larry shook his head and asked, "Oh, what's going on? Where's the Scarecrow?" "It ran off," I said between gulps of air. "It ran away." "Well, that's my cue to get along. Y'all have a night," Wes said, quickly hopping into his truck and firing it up. Larry shook his head. "He's already mad about the raids. We can't afford to scare him off with stories of running scarecrows loose in the facility." "It's not a story, I saw it," I said. "And frankly, right now, I don't give a shit about scaring off clients. I just saw a scarecrow." A rock came screaming in from the darkness and slammed into Larry's elbow. It landed with a slap. He screamed, dropped the pen that he was holding, and cradled his arm. A welt grew, his skin reddening from the blow. "What the hell was that?" "Let me see your flashlight," I said, taking it from him. I shone the light over to where we had left the first scarecrow. It was gone. Larry, the man who never shut up, was stunned into silence. His mouth opened, but the words died on his tongue. Sweat stains grew from the armpits of his shirt, and his eyes darted back and forth near the elevator. His whole body trembled. He absent-mindedly rubbed his growing welt. I'm gonna head inside," he said, turning his attention away from the elevator to the office. "I got some paperwork to." He never reached the door. The scarecrow that Wes had freed from the pit was standing in front of it, staring at us. The elevator belt had mangled its shirt, tearing it open and exposing bloody hay inside. It didn't move, but I swear it was breathing. "How?" was all that Larry got out. Distracted as we were, another rock came crashing in and caught Larry on the shoulder. It was larger than the last, and the blow made him stumble and turn toward the thrower. Before he responded, another stone smashed Larry in the cheek. It split his skin open and blood spurted from the wound. Larry slapped his hand on the cut, blood seeping through the cracks of his fingers, and stumbled away. His eyes rolled back into his head and he crashed to the ground. Before I could help him, another projectile flew in and hit him square in the temple. A noise like a ripe melon popping open. Any consciousness that he was clinging to fell away, and his rotund body dropped like a dying ox. Blood from his head wounds pooled around his face. I shone the flashlight into the dark, and another scarecrow was standing there. At first blush, it resembled the other two, but then my eyes clued in on something that caused me to choke back vomit. The burlap bag and rope on this scarecrow's body were still wet with fresh blood. It dripped down and stained the front of the Letterman jacket that it was wearing. It was Dennis Temple, or at least a body that had been Dennis Temple. Did you kill the kid?" The scarecrow started laughing. A deep, back-of-the-throat laugh that was muffled through the blood-soaked hay. It reached behind his back and softly tossed something toward my feet. The mystery item rolled along the dirt and gravel until it came to a stop at my boot. It was a human heart. The scarecrow clapped its hands together and 3 more scarecrows emerged from the shadows around the elevator and office. 2 smaller ones dressed in red hoodies flanked a big fella. With the same disdain, they rolled their hearts to my feet as well. My mind raced for a way out of this mess. I patted my pants for my keys, but they weren't on me. I had left them in the office, which was being guarded by a sinister scarecrow. To think, I once thought this job would be less stressful than working at the town's Taco Bell. The Letterman picked up another rock and hurled it at me. Unlike Larry, I dodged it, but I wouldn't be able to dodge everything. I glanced at Larry's unmoving body. The guy was an ass, but he didn't deserve this. I wasn't sure if he was dead or not, but I didn't want to be. I turned on my heels and booked it toward the entrance to the elevator complex. Despite my plans not to do so, I glanced back. The scarecrows had gathered around his body and were laying their hands on him. In between my footfalls on the gravel and my labored breasts, they began ripping his skin away in strips. That tearing and Larry's screams filled the night sky. When he finally went quiet, it was clear what had happened. They had turned him into a scarecrow. As the gate to the complex came into view, a pair of yellow truck headlights appeared and flew toward me. They burst through the gate arm, splintering the wood and sending it tumbling end over end. The truck wasn't slowing, but the driver lay on the horn. I jumped out of the way right before it would have turned me into a grease spot. As it zoomed past, I smiled. Wes had come back. The chasing scarecrow stopped, momentarily confused, and that slight hesitation cost them. Wes slammed into them, sending the straw men scattering into the wind. The truck came to a skidding stop just outside the office building. Wes hopped out and yelled for me to give him a hand. I didn't hesitate. I ran back as fast as my feet would fly. Wes dropped the tailgate and he was pulling out 2 propane tanks as I caught up with him. In between my gasping breaths, Wes attached a length of orange hose to the nozzle of each tank. The hose connected to a water pressure gun, or so I thought. Wes pulled the trigger and a bright burst of orange flame roared out of the tip. "Weed burners," he said, handing me a propane tank. "Saves the pain of weeding my family plot by hand. I figured it would cook these devils up and send them back to the seventh circle of Hades." "Hell yes," I said, firing a small flame. "Why'd you come back?" "You've always been square by me, and it didn't feel mighty Christian of me to leave a good man in a lurch. How'd I be able to ask the Lord and Savior for help if I'd tucked tail and ran when one of his flock needed me?" he said with a smile. "Now let's toast some ghouls." I laughed. What in the childhood dream was this? We clinked the tips of our guns together and fanned out. Besides the original two, there were the 4 teens and Larry. I didn't see his body among the others, but I figured he was around here somewhere. Wes walked up to the armless scarecrow who had been partially de-stuffed from the impact with the truck. With no hesitation, he pressed the trigger and burned the scarecrow to embers. As the flame ate away at the burlap bag, the monster let loose a painful yell. A white ball of light burst from the ashes and rose into the night sky, a dandelion spore catching a ride in the breeze. Before too long, it was just another white dot in a sky full of them. Wes moved on to the next victim. I came across Dennis Temple first. The accident had shorn his legs from the rest of his body. The top half was crawling along to where they had landed. Before it reconstituted itself, I aimed my gun down, sighted its burlap head, and blasted it with flames. It screamed and I grinned as the hay caught fire, curled, and burned to ash. Another white ball shot up into the sky. I moved on. Wes's demolition derby had done the lion's share of the work. These things had been stunned and now we were just mopping up. Each time we came upon a pile of hay, we blasted it with fire until it didn't exist anymore. Within 10 minutes, every visible scarecrow had become a pile of ash that drifted in the breeze. I finally let go of the trigger. The propane tank was lighter than it had been. I pulled the trigger again and no flame came leaping out. I turned to Wes. I went a little crazy. It's hard not to. Our burning spree had brought us back around by the grain elevator. The hatch was barely visible under the gravel and kernels that had been kicked up in the fighting. Wes placed his propane tank down and wiped his sweaty brow. "Is that all of them?" "Larry," I said. "I didn't see Larry." "Is he?" I nodded. Wes made a sign of the cross. "He was an idiot most of the time, but even idiots shouldn't go out like that. Everyone deserves a chance at redemption." "Yeah," was all that I added. "We should find him or whatever he is now. If we don't, he'll find new people to, in fact, change. What even are these things and where did they come from?" "Hell," Wes said. "They came from..." He never finished the sentence. The hatch opened under him and he fell into the grain elevator pit. He let out a painful yelp as the propane tank clanged against his body. The elevator started up and Wes hollered and scrabbled away from the quickly moving belts. I trailed off. Out of the corner of my eye, a familiar figure was standing near the hatch controls. Larry, or what used to be Larry. He was one of them now. He turned his bloodied, burlap head toward me and nodded. "Oh damn," I said as Larry took his first lumbering step toward me. I tried lighting up my propane torch again, but it was empty. "Oh, come on," I tried again, and nothing happened. Larry's first few steps reminded me of a baby deer just figuring out how to walk, but it didn't stay that way. Bambi eventually found his footing and started running at me. I dropped the propane tank and booked it in the opposite direction. Larry followed. I didn't have a clue where to go. I couldn't just run away. Plus, I didn't want to abandon Wes down in the pit. The man had come riding to the rescue in his pickup. What kind of man would I be if I left him in there? Letting Larry get turned made my guts tighten, a guilt I was sure would grow with every day that I was on this side of the soil, but I couldn't change it now. The musky smell of overly wet corn caught my attention. I was near Silo 10. A divine spark set off a raging fire in my brain. I might not be able to outrun this thing, but I could trap it. I darted off through the row of grain bins until I got to a supply shed. Thankfully, Larry was lazy and never locked these. I ripped open the doors and flipped on the overhead light. On the shelf was what I had come for, a safety harness and a guide wire. I slipped on the harness and wrapped the wire coil around my arm. Before I darted back out, I grabbed a ventilator mask and put that on as well. I exited the shed and clocked Larry, now full on running, bits of hay falling off his body with each long stride. I took off at a full sprint myself, heading for Silo 10. I kicked at the ladder latch until it came free, sending it sliding down. As soon as it hit, I hooked on one end of the guide wire to the base of the silo and the other to my harness. With the carabiner's click, I started up the ladder. I was 5 rungs up when Larry's hay hand grabbed my boot and yanked me down. I swung my free leg at him, but Straw Larry was more nimble than Human Larry had ever been. With a strength that shocked me, he caught a hold of my legs and yanked down with all his might. The tips of my fingers slipped off the rounded rung and I went crashing to the ground. The straw man helped break my fall, but it was still far enough to force all the air from my lungs. I rolled onto my stomach and away from Larry's windmilling arms. I coughed and finally caught my breath in the middle of the roll. Right after my first breath, Larry's foot found my stomach. Pain rippled through my body and I vomited. Another swift blow to my ribs caused one of them to crack, constricting my muscles around my chest. I rolled away again, but the guide wire worked like a leash at this point. I wouldn't be able to run with it still attached. Even though this wasn't my former boss, I recalled every time that he had pissed me off and let that anger strengthen me. I scrambled back up to my feet and turned to the scarecrow. He ran at me again, growling and snarling. I yanked hard on the wire, pulling it taut, and ran at Larry. The wire clotheslined him, sending him sprawling to the ground. I had hoped it would slice him in half, but knocking him down gave me enough time to make it back to the ladder and scramble up. Larry grabbed the first rung as I reached the top. I slid the ventilator over my face, unlocked the escape hatch, and threw it open. Instantly, a wave of noxious gas hit me. The silo being warm against my back earlier made sense. Something nasty and dangerous was brewing in here among the millions of kernels. Muttering a quick prayer, I climbed into the hatch and found the top rung inside the silo. This bin was almost full, so the trip down into the kernels was short. I gingerly placed a foot on the corn, and it shifted under my weight. I placed my other foot down, and despite some more shifting, I stayed level. A shadow fell over me. Larry had arrived. I wasn't sure if these things had rational thoughts, but I swear I could see the wheels turning inside its stupid burlap head. Come on down here. You come down here and you can get me. Just a tasty treat waiting for you. It stood there unmoving, unblinking, waiting. I wanted it to get in here already. Even with the mask, the gas buildup in here was intense. My eyes started watering. Larry found the wire next to his hand and picked it up. With a strength that no being made of hay should have, he yanked on the wire and pulled me toward the hatch. Sensing a wind, Larry wrapped the guide wire around his arm and started pulling me up. My body ascended and I squirmed around to stop it. I tried rocking my weight backward, hoping to tip Larry over, but he held firm. Everything that I tried to do to stop him had failed. I was getting closer to being within his arm's grasp. From the tips of his stray fingers, tiny razor-sharp thresher blade tips emerged like a cat's claws. They twitched in anticipation of the soft skin they would rip into. The idea of those blades slicing off my face focused my brain. I had to free myself. It was now or never. The loose corn ground against my boots. A kernel caught the side and shot out, ricocheting around the silo. As it bounced around, my thoughts followed suit. I glanced back. A thin layer of clumped corn kernels spread across the middle of the silo. I smiled. "Come on, big fella, pull me up." I screamed and relaxed my body. Larry kept yanking the wire, slowly bringing me up to the hatch opening. The tip of my boot found the first rung of the internal silo ladder, and I braced both of my feet on it. I let him pull me within a few inches of his grasp, the whole time keeping my legs cocked and ready to fire. As he leaned over to pull me the rest of the way up, I pushed in close. I was face to face with the scarecrow. The stench of rotting hay and death wafted off the burlap sack. I braced my arms against the hatch opening, leaned all my weight back on my heels, and pushed off with all my might. Larry's grasp slipped, and I fell butt first into the corn. Loose kernels took to the air as my body crashed below the grain. The vibrations of thousands of corn kernels rumbled as my body sank lower. 5 seconds to get stuck, 30 to be engulfed. Larry recovered from nearly tipping in and gripped the guide wire again. He tugged with all his might, but the weight of the corn held me in place. With every slight movement of my arms and legs, I became more trapped in the grain. The pressure grew, squeezing me like a corn cocoon. If I went too far in, I'd be crushed to death. The guide wire went slack and my body dropped another inch. I wasn't sure what was happening until Larry cannonballed right near me. Even under the crushing weight of the corn, I allowed myself a smile. He thought that he was landing on solid ground, but as soon as his straw feet found the kernels, he broke through the crust and fell into a void. The rumble was instant and loud. Millions of kernels broke free and fell toward the newly formed hole in the middle of the silo. The pressure that had nearly crushed me to death had disappeared in a blink. Larry was instantly engulfed. His thresher-tipped fingers disappeared below the corn. With the crust now collapsed, my newly born body emerged from the cocoon. I hung from the guideline over the gaping hole and allowed myself to smile. Larry was somewhere in the churning grain, hopefully crushed into a hail bay. I swung myself back onto the ladder and clambered out. I slammed the escape hatch shut and I latched it. The struggle had nearly torn the bulky ventilator off my face, so I finished the job and I threw it into the dark. I took in a deep breath of fresh air, my lungs purging the gas that I had ingested, and scrambled down the side of the silo as fast as my body could go. I was so concerned with getting down that I hadn't noticed Wes standing at the bottom of the stairs, cradling a hurt arm and urging me on. "Is he dead?" "I think the only way to kill it is to burn it." "Well, how are you gonna do that if he's trapped?" I grabbed Wes's hand and placed it on the side of the silo. "Oh, this thing is just waiting for a spark." "Golly," he said, taking a step back. "You weren't the only one with wet kernels," I said. "I'll be right back." I unhooked the harness and sprinted away from Silo 10 and back toward the office. Bursting through the door, I scrambled to Larry's desk and started ripping open drawers until I found what I was looking for: an old bottle of whiskey. Never had I been thankful for somebody being an alcoholic, but tonight had been a night of firsts already. Why stop with zombie scarecrows? By the time I got back with the bottle in my hand, Wes had done the math. I grabbed his propane tank, opened up the valve, and placed it at the base of the silo. Wes started up his truck and nervously drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, his foot hovering over the gas pedal. I moved to the passenger side of the truck, pulled out my lighter, and I lit the rag. It was go time. The kernels inside the silo were still shifting. Either the remains were still collapsing or Larry was trying to claw his way out. I let the fire on the rag grow. Once it had reached a critical point, I whispered a prayer and hurled it at the base of the silo. It smashed into the propane tank. I ducked into the truck and screamed to drive. Wes, hurt arm and all, didn't miss a beat. The man sent us into hyperspace and we tore ass down the gravel road, kicking up rocks as we blew past the busted entry gate. The propane container erupted. That bomb wasn't the end of the line. It was the catalyst that would ignite the bigger and dirty volatile gas inside Silo 10. The ribs of the silo flattened under the growing internal pressure. I guess those chemistry classes that I took at school weren't such a waste of time after all. We were a half-mile down the road when the silo boomed. A flash of white light illuminated the road in front of us for a fleeting second. The shock wave slammed into the truck, causing us to fishtail. Wes pulled over and we scrambled out. A huge fireball rocketed into the night sky, a Midwestern Nagasaki torching everything that it touched. "How do you like that?" Wes said, staring at the growing blaze. "I don't," I said, "but goddamn, what a beautiful sight." I'm not one to go around blaspheming, but goddamn seems like the only right word at the moment. I laughed. He was right. Goddamn indeed. There's no coal left in the hills around my hometown. Even before the mountaintops were cleared, even before the trees withered and the water in the streams ran gray, we knew that the end was coming. Anybody who could had left town in search of a better life somewhere else, but there were plenty more of us who couldn't. I was one of them. If you watch the news, you might have heard about some of the darker activities that folks out here turned to after the mines had closed down. Pills, drugs, other worse things that the media never got wind of. Like how Randy Clevewell and his brothers would park their pickup on the side of the highway and pretend to have broken down. And then when somebody stopped, well, you get the idea. They stripped the vehicles for parts, and then buried the bodies so deep in the woods that they won't be found until Judgment Day. More than once, Randy invited me to ride along, but I wasn't that desperate. Not back then, anyway. The pension that Ma received each month wasn't much, but between that, our garden, and a few deer per season, we managed to get by without hurting anybody else. One morning in November, I woke up to find the house cold. Ma usually turned on the heater before she made breakfast for the two of us, and I remember laying beneath all those blankets and praying that the propane hadn't run out early. If it had, we couldn't afford to replace it until next month. I knew that Ma was dead even before I pulled open the curtains of her bedroom. I'd like to believe that the overdose was accidental, but a letter that I found on her nightstand makes me think otherwise. It was from the mining company that Pa had worked for, announcing its own insolvency. Ma was too old and unhealthy to work, so I knew what the news meant for her. The end of her ability to feed herself and her family. The end of everything. Almost everyone in town showed up to Ma's funeral, and still the church looked empty. The Clevewell brothers gave me a nod from across the aisle. I looked at my polished black shoes and wondered if I was ready to take them up on their offer. There didn't seem to be much of a choice. And then on the drive back through town, I saw something strange beside the closed-down diner. Now hiring. And those words that hadn't been seen in these parts for a decade, if not longer. And yet there they were, blood red against the white walls of a pop-up tent. I parked along the deserted curb and walked up to it before I even knew what I was doing. Two people sat behind a plastic table within, a man and a woman, 20-somethings, both dressed in matching blue vests. They were clean-cut, stylish, and they smelled like the city. The boy introduced himself as Jude, the girl Aisha. They shook my hand and asked how my day was going. I looked down at my funeral suit and thought better of telling them the truth. They wanted to know if I was looking for work. I told them that I was. They were all smiles as they indicated the folios beside them and suggested that I fill out the application inside. The longer the pair talked, the more uneasy I began to feel. The whole interaction felt scripted, and although their brochure was full of flowery language and sleek photographs, by the time that I got to the end of it, I still had no idea exactly what kind of work Jude and Aisha were offering. I had never heard of the company Arcova Industries, and the pay they were offering wasn't much to brag about. Still, it was better than any other legal work those of us who were stuck here were likely to get. As I slipped the form into the box beside Jude and Aisha, I had the strangest feeling that I had already gotten the job. And as it turned out, my instincts were right. I got the call 2 days later while I was plucking the weeds from Mom's garden and wishing that I had paid more attention to how she had made it grow. I wasn't surprised to hear Aisha's voice on the other end of the line, telling me that my application had been accepted. I could come in Monday to sign the paperwork and begin my orientation. I did a double take when I heard the address that I was supposed to report to. It was the portal of the old mine. Portal. It was the word the industry used to designate the critical point of access to a mine system, the only way in or out of an underground world. And back when Pa was still alive and working down there, that was exactly how I had imagined it. A glowing electrostatic field straight out of one of the cheesy sci-fi movies that we got on the dish networks. It was only later, after the mine had shut down, and all of us kids had started hanging around the fenced-off ruins, that I understood that the portal was much more like a great black mouth in the mountainside. When I pulled up that cloudy Monday morning, the lights were on in the offices the mining company had abandoned. I recognized a lot of the vehicles out front too. Arcova Industries had built a series of large structures, almost like a warehouse linking the offices to the portal. From the parking area, it looked like a cancerous white growth on the side of the mountain. There were so many familiar faces in the bare white room that Aisha led me into that it seemed like a town meeting. Young and old, male and female, black or white, it didn't matter. Everyone had come in search of something that we hadn't had out here for a long time. A little bit of hope. It was Jude who gave the presentation, a fact which led me to question whether Arcova Industries had any employees apart from that pair of grinning city slickers. The gist of it was simple. Some of us would be going into the mine to drill deeper, while others would be transporting the broken stone or scanning it as it exited the pit. Scanning for what? I wondered. There was nothing of value down there anymore. Everybody knew that. Still, a job was a job, and we were all happy to milk it while it lasted. And the mine had closed down before I was old enough to go underground, but some of the older guys like Clive and Owen had experience with heavy equipment. They would be the ones drilling and moving the rock. The rest of us, like me, would be sorting or scanning on the line. By the end of the first hour of training, I was already bored to tears. There was nothing special about the lumps of ugly charcoal gray rock that came down the conveyor belt, or at least, nothing that set off the mundane scanners in our hands. They reminded me of the ones used in a supermarket, only heavier, as though their electronic guts were more complicated than that. I wondered queasily if we were testing for radiation or some kind of deadly pollutant. And if so, why weren't we wearing any safety equipment apart from gloves, goggles, hard hats, and those ridiculous blue vests? After our first day, a lot of us went over to Sloan's for a drink. It was the only bar nearby that had survived the mine shutdown, and that was only because it was near the highway and the owner turned a blind eye to all the nefarious activity that went on in his parking lot. Even old Bobby Sloan himself seemed to be in a good mood that night, and why not? We were all buying rounds like there was no tomorrow. Maybe this whole thing was a sign that the luck of this forgotten little town was finally starting to turn. We spent all night speculating about who our new employers were and what they wanted. The theories got wilder the more we drank, but by closing time we were no closer to an answer than we had been when we had walked in the door. 3 months passed that way, and good months for the most part. Folks in town had money again, and it was honest money, no matter how odd or soul-crushing the work seemed to be. Most of us just spaced out until our shift was over, drank until we felt good about it, and then did it all over again the next day. Jude and Aisha were the only ones who seemed excited about the whole thing, passionate even, like they were waiting for something to happen. And then, on a sunny afternoon in February, it finally did. Connie, up at the head of the line, was passing her scanner over more of the same gray rocks, and without warning, the device beeped. It was so faint and sudden that we weren't sure that we had heard it at first, but Jude came running. He collected the plastic box of shattered stone and took it away without another word. The line stopped running, and we were all sent home for the day. The next morning, everything seemed like business as usual, except Clive didn't show up for work. Connie, who had had her nose in other people's business for as long as I could remember, had asked Aisha about his absence. The hip young administrator brushed off her concerns, although she couldn't go into detail for legal reasons. She was confident that Clive was just fine. And maybe he was, but no one in town ever saw him again. I wasn't as bothered by Clive's disappearance as some of the others were, and the guy had always been a flake, and everyone knew how toxic his relationship with his ex Jennifer was. Every other day he swore that he was going to pack his bags and leave town, and I couldn't say that I blamed him. I had had some similar thoughts myself. As the money piled up, I started to speculate about how much I would need to start over someplace new. In a few months, I would have enough to seriously consider the idea, but for the moment, it was back to scanning rubble. It wasn't long before Jude came to me with an awkward request. Since I was the youngest and fittest one on my crew, he wanted me to take Clive's place within the mine itself. Jude reminded me that shift rotations were included in my contract, and I saw right away what he was implying. If I refused, I'd be fired on the spot. While I wasn't thrilled about going down there, in the dark beneath all those silent tons of rocks, I told myself that it would be more interesting than sitting in front of a conveyor belt for 8 hours a day. Besides, I might get a chance to ask Owen for more details about what had happened to Clive. I blazed through the company-mandated safety course, and in no time at all I was ready to head underground with Owen. He was a burly, heavy-set guy in his 40s, who hardly ever smiled and talked even less. As we descended into the darkness, he pointed out the massive, colorful markings on the walls which pointed to the exit. "And the way out is clear," Owen told me. "Most of the time." "Huh?" I scratched my head, already sweating beneath my helmet. "And just be careful, that's all," Owen shrugged. The pitch blackness of the tunnels opened endlessly ahead and closed endlessly behind. It felt like hours had passed before we had reached the new excavations, which I noticed uncomfortably continued straight ahead and down. This wasn't a long wall setup. It wasn't even the outdated room and pillar technique that the previous company had used. It was just a hole. Watch out for the walls. They like to bleed, Owen grumbled. They like to what? I shouted. I was sure that I hadn't heard him right, but he was trudging even further down the new tunnel. It wasn't long before we had reached its end, and an even more obvious question occurred to me. How do we know where to dig? I asked Owen. Like this. I realized that the big man had a device hanging from his belt, one that wasn't so different from the scanners that we used up above. He moved it slowly along the rough-cut stone until it beeped. Here, Owen tapped the rock. We dig here. While we split stone and transported the rubble up to the scanning crew, I thought over what Owen had said. The way out is clear most of the time. Watch out for the walls. They like to bleed. I had gone to school with Owen's younger brother, and I remembered him as the sort of guy who would tie a burning rag to a stray cat's tail for fun. He was probably just messing with me, making me sweat a little for being the new guy. We worked in silence for a few hours, and then just before our lunch break, I noticed a thin trickle of liquid running down the wall beside me. I couldn't tell whether it was inky black or just looked that way because of how it stained the rock. But whatever it was, it didn't seem to be water. When I tapped Owen on the shoulder and pointed to it, he just rolled his eyes. You'll get used to it, was all that he said. I wish I could say that I did, but every time I saw that stuff seep out of the wall, like it was oozing from an open wound, I got a queasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. And then there were the echoes. Noises that, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find a logical explanation for. It almost sounded like something was crawling along the other side of the stone. Back when the mine was in full operation, crowded with workers and the racket of all that machinery, nobody would have noticed the noise. But now things were different down here. The first time the signals on the wall changed, I didn't notice until the panic set in. I made 4 right turns, and yet somehow I still wasn't back where I had started. These rough-cut stone tunnels all looked the same, and how many miles of them were connected to our work site? How long might it be before someone realized that I was missing? Owen had already taken his lunch break, and for all I knew, he wouldn't even report me missing. Maybe he would think that it was funny. The more nervous I got, the faster I jogged, until I was soaked with sweat beneath my heavy gear. I was utterly and hopelessly lost. I stood still and listened to the currents of air that traversed those empty passages, to the dripping of water somewhere far away. The skittering sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I spun trying to locate it, and came face to face with a stranger at the far end of the passage. No, not a stranger. Clive. In the blinding beam of his headlamp, it took me a moment to recognize him, but when I did, it was obvious that he had been dead for days. Something had eaten his eyes. Rigor mortis had locked his face into a hideous, gray grin, and yet somehow he spoke to me, a single word. Leave. I fled that awful walking corpse as fast as I could. I nearly ran straight into Owen's beer gut as he rounded the corner. I jabbed my finger over my shoulder in terror, but when I turned, the passage was empty. From somewhere down below, a current of air blew my damp, grimy hair a little tighter against my scalp. Why'd you sneak off to take a piss or something? Owen sneered. Too good to use a bottle like the rest of us. He shook a little plastic jug full of yellow liquid. I couldn't believe it, but I was actually happy to see the guy. The mean glint in Owen's eye suggested that he knew exactly what had just happened to me. Maybe he had even gone through similar experiences, but as long as it wasn't happening to him, he clearly thought the whole thing was hilarious. I wish I could say that it ended there, but it didn't. Each week we tunneled deeper, and the further we went, the more frequent those hallucinations, if that's what they were, became. I would hear voices calling my name or smell Ma's unforgettable biscuits and gravy from the end of a passage that led to nowhere. I'd feel something pull angry at the roots of my hair, but when I turned, there was only Owen, standing a few feet away and cursing under his breath as he drilled. According to the crew above, the scanners were going off more often, and Jude and Aisha buzzed along the conveyor belt, boxing up rocks and shipping them off to God knows where. At the end of the third week, our drills punched through to empty air. Owen and I paused, looked at each other, and cleared out more rock around the opening that we had made. This wasn't just an air pocket or the sink of a creek. There was some kind of chamber on the other side. I couldn't tell how big it was, but our headlamps barely made a dent in all that darkness. We had returned to the portal to tell Jude and Aisha what we had discovered, but they were gone, replaced by a man in a white lab coat with newscaster hair and a plastic smile. There was nothing sincere in his dry, overly firm handshake, but when I described the chamber down below, he listened with complete attention. After I had finished, he congratulated us and thanked us for our findings. He introduced himself as Dr. Atwood and then announced that it was time to move on to the next phase of the operation. There were several crates of new equipment stacked up beside the door. Among them were several ugly, futuristic-looking helmets with even more powerful headlamps and integrated recording gear. Owen, right? Dr. Atwood squeezed the big man's shoulder, or at least as close as he could get to it. You'll go first. The cameras can only stream for 3 hours straight, so make it snappy, all right. It took a while for the big man to process the fact that he was being sent back down there alone. I wonder now whether Dr. Atwood had planned the whole thing, knowing that no matter how afraid a man like Owen was, he would never chicken out in front of his entire work crew, especially considering how a lot of us were people who he had frightened or bullied over the years. He took off his helmet and ran his fingers through his thinning, greasy blonde hair. Yeah, whatever, boss. We watched him go in silence. Everyone stared at the floor, thinking different versions of the same thing. That somebody should say something, that something was wrong here, that none of this was what we had signed up for. Dr. Atwood clapped his hands together. Well, now we all can take a little break. I brought coffee and donuts. Dr. Atwood scampered off, leaving us alone with 2 thermoses of lukewarm coffee and a box of stale old-fashions. There was no sign of Jude or Aisha, and nobody felt like eating much. Somehow accepting Dr. Atwood's gift felt like making a deal with the devil. An hour passed, and then 2. We ran out of things to talk about. Our eyes kept drifting to the yawning black mouth of the portal, and to the clock. 3 hours and 30 minutes had passed when the buzzer rang for quitting time, and Dr. Atwood emerged from wherever he had been hiding to shake our hands and thank us for a job well done. And get ready for a big day tomorrow, he told us. Connie squared up with her hands on her hips and said she wanted to wait for Owen. A few of the others agreed, and Dr. Atwood informed her that that was against regulations. Connie had just started to tell him where he could stick his regulations when he leaned in, quick and close as a striking snake, and whispered something in her ear. When Dr. Atwood lifted his head, he was all smiles once again. Connie, meanwhile, had gone pale. She grimaced while she shuffled toward the exit, and when we asked what Dr. Atwood had said to her, she only shook her head. We all arrived early the next morning, eager to hear what Owen had to say, but Dr. Atwood announced that he had already gone below. I had a nasty suspicion that what he really meant was that Owen had never left. a feeling that only intensified when he told me that I would be going down next. I could have quit right then. I had saved up enough to survive for a couple months, maybe even enough to leave town, if I didn't mind sleeping in my truck and using 24-hour gyms as my only source of showers and Wi-Fi. By then, however, it wasn't about the money. I had to know what I had been a part of these past months. The brave smile that I tried to show Connie and the others probably looked more like a scowl, but no one said anything. This job was the last chance for so many of us, and not admitting to the strangeness around us seemed to be the only way that we could keep it. I buckled on my helmet, picked up my gear, and walked alone into those black tunnels. I kept expecting to experience something strange during my walk down to the chamber, but I didn't see or hear anything, not even the light of Owen's headlamp. As I poked my head into the vast empty space, I remembered uncomfortably that Dr. Atwood, and who knew how many others, were watching all this live. The walls of the chamber reached much higher than even my new high-powered headlamps could reach. They sloped inward and up just as the ground beneath my feet sloped down, creating an enormous egg-shaped room. I followed Owen's footprints in the cave dust very, very carefully. The idea that I might slip and tumble into a pit whose bottom I still couldn't see made me tense enough to snap. As I trudged down the incline, I became aware of tiny indentations in the grit around me. They had probably been caused by water droplets falling from the roof of the chamber, but to my imagination they looked like the imprints left behind by thousands of tiny lambs. There was a noise too, barely noticeable at first. It became more distinct the further I walked. At first, I had thought it was just the movement of air through the chamber, but it was too steady, too rhythmic for that. I didn't want to go any further, I realized. To hell with Dr. Atwood and his precious footage. Then again, I knew that if I didn't discover the source of that sound, I would go on hearing it in my dreams until the day that I died. After another 40 paces, there was still no bottom in sight. At the limit of my light, however, a lumpy shape stood out against the sameness of the pockmarked slope. Owen? The combination of fear and dust in my throat made my voice crack. There was no answer, but the noise that I had been hearing picked up its pace, almost like it was excited. I forgot all about my fear of falling and started to jog down the steep, loose ground toward whatever it was. Owen lay on his back, half covered in dust. His headlamp was off, his helmet knocked aside. There was a hideous gash in his throat, but his big belly still rose and fell slowly. The noise that I had been hearing had been the echo of his blood-choked breaths. "Owls," Owen burbled, when I was near enough for him to recognize me. His eyes were wide with terror, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. I leaned in even closer and gestured to my ear. "The walls! They're inside the walls!" Owen snarled and spat blood. The renewed flow drowned the rest of whatever he was trying to say. In spite of the history I had with the guy, I didn't want to see him go like this. Pants darkened by piss, eyes wide with fear, choking on his own blood. I did what I could, but I was no medic. And a few moments later, Owen's breathing had stopped entirely. All the while, his final words kept booming through my brain. "The walls. They come out of the walls." He had saved all his strength to warn me, but how could I warn the others? According to Dr. Atwood, our equipment only allowed for one-way broadcasting back to the surface, but I no longer trusted anything that he had to say. Atwood must have known something terrible had happened to Owen, but he had sent me down here anyway, alone and unprepared, just to observe the results. It didn't matter to Arkova Industries whether I made it out of here alive or not. All they cared about was the data that I was transmitting. And Dr. Atwood had lied about so many things, What if he had lied about our gear as well? I fiddled with the dials and buttons on my helmet, sure that there had to be a way to reach the others. All the while, I swept the beam of my headlamp back and forth through the darkness, sure that when I turned around I would see some unknowable horror crawling toward me. After 10 minutes of trying, I still had nothing. I would have to try to make it back on foot if I could. If I would even be allowed to. For all I knew, Arcova Industries had a pair of goons in biohazard suits waiting at the entrance to the tunnel just for such an occasion. The silence of the chamber made any motion painfully loud, and that was how I noticed the chittering. Just as I had feared, and just as I had somehow known, it was coming from the depths below me, and moving faster than I could possibly run through all of that loose cave dust. Visions of Owen's mangled body flashed through my brain, and then I remembered his headlamp. It had been off, not because it had burned out, but because he had switched it off. Was the light what had drawn something out of the darkness? Was that what they had been attacking when they had mutilated Owen's face and neck? Maybe extinguishing the light had been the only reason he had survived to pass on his warning. The thought of being trapped in pitch blackness with whatever was coming was terrifying, but it was my only chance. I turned off my headlamp, lay down in the dust, and played dead. The rustling of hundreds of tiny legs came closer with every breath. Eventually, I tried not to breathe at all. The approaching sound slowed, wandered from side to side as though confused, and then finally faded into the distance. I sucked in a breath of chalky cavern air. I felt around with my hands until I found what I hoped was the imprint of a boot in the dust, and began a slow, lightless crawl back up to the surface. Every time I extended my hand, I expected it to brush against some horrible insectoid body. I cringed when my fingers finally brushed against hard rock. I had found the tunnel, but what now? When I finally dared to turn on my headlamp, the light was blinding, but there were no armed guards waiting for me. No nightmarish creatures with too many limbs. Still, Arcova Industries had to have a plan for what they had discovered here. Some kind of contingency in case something escaped, didn't they? I was halfway back to the surface when a speaker crackled to life inside my helmet. I had been right after all. There was more to our equipment than met the eye. I recognized Jude's voice on the other end, panicked, gasping, half drowned out by glass shattering in the background.
Dr. Atwood. Dr. Atwood, scanning crew, missed one. It hatched. It hatched. The lab is. What do I do?
Jude, this isn't a secure line.
Atwood replied, his voice ice cold.
Switch to channel 7.
The conversation vanished. Now I understood what we had been scanning for, and why those crates of rocks had been taken away. Although Owen had no way of knowing it at the time, his description of the walls bleeding had been eerily accurate. There must have been eggs inside the stone. The real treasure Arcova Industries was digging for was something more valuable than coal or gold, and much more dangerous. I ran as hard as I could toward the portal. Every time I blinked, I saw the faces of my crew. They were friends and neighbors who I had known for years. Some of them, like Connie, were faces that I had seen before I could walk. For all I knew, whatever had gotten loose was already attacking them. Distracted by my thoughts, I failed to pay attention to the signage on the walls and how it had changed. Once again, I was lost, and this time there was no Owen to show me the way back. I took a deep breath and I tried to think. I thought about the hallucinations that I had experienced. Was it possible that they had been meant as some sort of repellent? Was it possible that these creatures in the walls were releasing some sort of pheromone or frequency that affected our senses? I closed my eyes, placed my hand on the rough-cut rock, and retraced my steps to the first corner I remembered turning. When I opened them again, I had found my way back. 15 minutes later, I had reached the portal. The conveyor belt was stopped, the scanners abandoned, the line empty. Where the hell was everybody? I walked heel to toe as I crossed that wide warehouse floor, so silent that I could hear the buzz of the industrial lighting overhead. The stillness seemed to be hiding something. I didn't like to think about what. With gritted teeth, I made my way to the exit and I pushed through the door. It shrieked on its hinges. I cringed, then noticed something further along the corridor that chilled my blood. Part of the wall had swung outward, almost like a secret passage. Water pooled outward from a shattered pipe on the other side. I had found Arcova Industries' hidden laboratory, or what was left of it. The last thing I wanted to do was walk past it, but it was my only way out. Almost reluctantly, I peered inside as I tiptoed by. The lights had all been destroyed. Some broken piece of equipment whirred as it tried to activate itself, failed, and tried again. Glass fragments crunched in the water beneath my feet. Empty containers, the same ones used to transport the stone that we had been scanning, were scattered across the floor. Among them lay a slim young man in a familiar blue vest. A few grisly strands of red were all that was left of his head and neck. That chittering noise filled the area as soon as I had approached, but I didn't wait around to see its cause. I sprinted down the corridor with the one thing on my mind. Whatever these things were, they hated the light. If I could find the circuit breaker and plunge the building into darkness, anybody left inside might have a chance of getting out alive. I slammed into the push bar of the next door, only to discover that it was locked. Of course it was. Dr. Atwood was probably in damage control mode, trying to contain whatever had gotten loose while he figured out his next steps. The narrow glass window was shatterproof, but I bashed my fist against it like a madman anyway. Worried faces appeared in the entrance of the training room to my right. Connie, Dr. Atwood, and a few others. Atwood forced a smile and approached, his hands in the pocket of his white lab coat, while the sound of scuttling limbs behind me came closer and closer. He casually unlocked the door and reached out to pull me through. I felt my vision blur. One version of me was still standing there frozen in time. Another followed Atwood into the next hallway. He relocked the door, switched out the lights in the corridor behind me, and then guided me, or the shade of me, into the mundane training room where my friends and neighbors were waiting. I watched myself telling everybody what I had found, gesturing wildly to the door while Atwood slipped away. He unlocked another passage in the wall, slipped on a gas mask, and began pressing buttons. A fine white mist began to hiss out of the wall vents. Suddenly all of us were choking and clutching our throats, falling onto the cheap carpet while the world went black. My vision somehow spiraled out even further until I saw the explosives that were already rigged to collapse the portal and bury the whole area beneath ashes and rubble. For all I knew, they had been there since Arcova Industries had started digging. Maybe they knew exactly what was down there, and that was why they had sent a skeleton crew of 3 to direct the rest of us. Expendables who could be discarded once they had what they had come for. The mine's prior owners could be blamed for the cave-in, and the destruction would bury any evidence of what they had done. After all, who would investigate any further? It would just be one more tragedy for a little town that had already seen so many. I wondered how I was being made aware of all this. Was the same pheromone that had affected our minds in the tunnels being directed at me now to show me what was coming? It occurred to me that, like any living thing, whatever was in the hallway behind me simply did not want to die. It had killed Owen and Jude, but now I was its last, best hope of survival. My mind snapped back to the present. Dr. Atwood placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. He was trying to urge me through the door and proceed with the rest of his plan. My high school football days were far behind me, but I could still throw a mean shoulder check when I needed to. The blow took Atwood by surprise. It sent him careening back across the floor, leaving the door behind me wide open. My friends and neighbors looked up at me with shock in their eyes, and I realized that I had no idea what to say to them. Atwood groaned and climbed to his feet. It was now or never. "I can't explain, but we've got to get out of here, all of us, right now." People glanced at each other uncertain, and then Connie lurched to her feet and started toward me. "Well, come on," she told the rest of them. "We should have known it was too good to be true." "Stop," Atwood bellowed. All traces of that phony smile had disappeared, replaced by a look of wild obsession. He pulled a pistol from his pocket. "Get back in that room." He waved the weapon wildly, the door behind him forgotten. I can't describe the thing that I saw rising up over his back, but it was more than enough to convince my workmates that everything I had said was true. As its limbs closed around Dr. Atwood, I sprinted to the end of the second corridor and switched off the circuit breaker. The facility plunged into the blood-red gloom of emergency lighting, but none of us needed to see to know the way out. We had had parents and grandparents who had worked in these mines, who we had brought lunch boxes to or ran up to hug after a shift, careless of the grime that covered them. Screams, darkness, slamming doors. I kept running, praying that everyone would follow. We had just cleared the final corridor when the detonations had started. Distant at first, like thunder, they grew louder as they approached. The ground shook. Atwood must have had a dead man's trigger. Nobody was foolish enough to go for the vehicles. We aimed for the woods instead, where the brittle pine trees might help to deaden the impact of blast-flung rocks and the landslides that were soon coming. No one called the police. No one needed to. We heard sirens even before the rumbling stopped. More help came from the next town over, but there was little to be done. Nothing alive was coming out of that mine. Nothing human anyway. Our descriptions of what happened left the investigators scratching their heads. Some, like Connie, provided a tale full of mad scientists and cave monsters. Others simply stated that everybody had been called into the meeting room. I ran by with my warning and then the mine collapsed. At the time, I went with the second version. I wasn't sure who I could trust or what the consequences of telling the truth might be. But more than that, I was tired. Arkova Industries had already taken so much from me. My time, my energy, my hopes for the future, and very nearly my life. When I packed my truck and left for Arizona, the inquiry was still ongoing. At the end of the month, I received my final paycheck from Arkova Industries, along with an official letter informing me of the company's permanent closure. It was eerily similar to the memo that Ma received, except that instead of an end, it felt like a beginning. Where had the other crates that we had scanned gone? Did the things beneath the mountain survive the blast? I never learned the truth behind any of it. It's been years since I breathed anything other than clean desert air, but my dreams still follow those winding tunnels underground. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, wondering whether I ever actually left. After all, the hallucinations that those things pumped into my mind were so vivid, so real. How can I be sure they ever really ended?